Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Good morning. Please sit down. We are starting 3 minutes ahead of time because we have a lot to catch up. Okay, my name is Pankaj. Good morning to all of you and welcome to this workshop on data collection, analysis, utilization, visualization, etc. etc. Okay, so we have a full day. I want to start by introducing Radhika Kolbatra, Chief of Staff of UN Resident Coordinator's Office, for a quick welcome.
Thank you. That's quite a mouthful. So, I basically head the resident coordinator's office, and of course, this workshop has been organized by the resident coordinator's office, which basically works across the UN agencies. We are about 27 of us in the country. So, first of all, thank you for making your way from across the country. I heard you say I'm from Chennai. Please reduce the temperature. I'm not used to this. So I know all of you have made a long trek. What we are really excited about is the fact that we are able to get together in this room and really look at the brass tacks of what Leave No One Behind means, and from the data perspective. We know that civil society has played a very important role in the whole formulation of the post 2015 and then the Agenda 2030 process, and of course also in the implementation of it. Um, we know that the Leave No One Behind population groups are the ones that where the needs, where the access, where the opportunities need to be made available, without which we will fail collectively, not just as the country but as the world, if we are not able to demonstrate that real progress has been made. We also know that as of now, most countries, most regions are falling behind and are failing in achieving where we need to be. We have only 10 years to go starting next year. Very important part of how we will know whether what the imperative of the 2030 agenda was, which was the leave no one behind, whether that has been met or not, is to actually be able to demonstrate, measure whether the real progress has been achieved or not. And what better way to do that than to actually look at the disaggregation of progress for the population groups that each one of you represent. And for that, it's really important to know the hows to do it and be on the same page as to what do we need to do to look at this SDGs from the statistics perspective and see what needs to be measured, and, and what is the role that civil society can play in providing that feedback, enabling that measurement, and keeping the flag actually, and enabling advocacy on that. So this is our first attempt actually to do this. We know that there is a national indicator framework. We know that there are state indicator frameworks, but we also know that there are gaps in each one of those. And this is really a works in progress. So what we hope to get out of this is to really, and the selection of civil society colleagues for this workshop was based on the fact that all of you have already done some work on data and SDGs already. So we are not building from scratch, but you have laid the foundations on which we are all building together. And this is what, the idea of what we can do together, which you know. Of course, Pankaj will take you through the 2 days, and we have put together what we think is a interesting panel, and we also want to receive feedback from you at the end of it, and also suggestions on how we can then take this forward. I'm not going to take more time, but I do want to recognize Renuka from EU and thank her and the EU for their support in enabling this workshop. So have a good 2 days. I'm sorry, Delhi is not the best place to be in winter. It used to be romantically say Delhi ki sardi at one point of time. No longer it's all polluted and unfortunately not optimal. But at least in the office, we maintain optimal air quality. So, so hopefully you will be okay inside. Okay, so over to you.
Thanks. Thanks, Radhika. So we want to start by a quick round of introduction. And to save time, you will talk about just four things: your name, the organization to which you belong, your role in the organization or designation, and how many years you have spent in working on data. Please don't feel ashamed if you not particularly have a background on data. Just say, okay, I don't have a background on data. Just for us to know broadly what level we need to pitch our stuff on. Yeah. So Radhika's done. You want to start? Okay. Sorry. One second. So what you can do is you press on this knob here with the Wi-Fi sign, and it turns red, and you can start speaking on the mic. Yeah, on your table. Turns green, and this one turns red. Hopefully.
Okay, good morning to all. At least a good morning to. So I'm Ranjit Bhengra. So I belong to Leads organization that is in Ranchi, Jharkhand, and I have been working in the organization last 9 years. And frankly saying that data, there is no background from my side, but I have been working in different projects and leading the livelihood basically.
Good morning, sir. And I'm Shukudev Debonma from Tripura as my Sama Welfare Society since running 2000. But since 2000, I'm working a long time. But this data is very important for me and very ignore myself because it is the first time in my life. Never we have seen, we heard, but it is a very first time in our area. So this is a good opportunity for me to participate here. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Basant Kumar Naik. I represent Center for Youth and Social Development, COIST from Odisha. It's a 37 years organization. The organization works in 3 areas, livelihoods, governance, and disaster and climate action. Basically, I lead the governance work of the organization. In inclusive governance work, we do policy and budget research at the macro level. And also we have lot of actions in 9 districts at the community level, in which we generate lot of data through participatory method. And I have the experience in dealing data for last 7-8 years. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Murali. I represent an organization called FANSA, Freshwater Action Network South Asia, which is a network of civil society organizations working on water sanitation hygiene issues. My position is South Asia Regional Convener, and FANSA has been doing a lot of advocacy work, as part of which we do keep collecting data, sourcing data from other sources, and use it for pitching our advocacy positions. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I am Binish Nafis. I represent Center for Social Equity and Inclusion. I work there as a policy and advocacy research person, and I'm associated with research from last 2.5 years. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Ganga Nandini, and I'm representing the Global Interfaith WASH Alliance. I am the director of program implementation and integration and communication. I have actually, to be honest, not really worked with data, but not in a very structured way, and so hence I'm here to learn more.
Good morning, one and all. This is Chitti Babu, came from Andhra Pradesh. I am working as a General Secretary for the Dalit Bahujan Shramik Union. We are working on the access to the justice and livelihood rights, and also land rights also for the Dalits and Adivasis. Recently, we are conducting the study along with the government. I am since 2 years, I am working with the research methodology and data, interpreting the data.
Good morning, everybody. Myself is Satish, working with Center for Dalit Rights Jaipur, that basically promotion and protection of Dalit rights. And I have little bit experience of this year feeding data of that goal 5, gender equality this year. That's all. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Varghese Taikanath from Hyderabad. I represent an organization called Montfort Social Institute, which is basically a Center for Human Rights and Sustainable Development Education. We particularly work on unorganized workers. We run 2 state-level trade unions of domestic workers and also housing rights. So 8 and 11 of the SDGs are our primary areas of work. I'm the director of the institute. In terms of data, on and off, we have been collecting data on these 2 sectors, particularly the last 7-8 years.
Good morning. I'm Annie Namala. I'm the convener for Vadana Todo Abhiyan. Very happy to have everyone at this workshop. I have sort of done some work on data, not a lot of work, but we've been particularly in Vadana Todo concerned about the most marginalized communities, and we've been collecting data on the communities along the SDG indicators, and really look forward to this whole workshop to take the knowledge forward. Thank you.
I'm Bablu Loitongbam. I work with a group called Human Rights Alert based in Imphal in Manipur. Well, in terms of data, we have been doing some data collection on situations of human rights, particularly in the context of conflict and fighting impunity. We have been using data to put forward our advocacy work. And also I work as a kind of a regional coordinator of Wadana Toro Avian, doing SDG works in particularly in the Northeast. So some experience, but much to learn here.
I'm Edwin from the Human Rights Advocacy and Research Foundation. I'm comfortable with numbers, but I really haven't worked with large data sets.
Good morning. I'm Sonia from Development Support Team. I come with a very different background. I am a computer science person. So in the Women's Empowerment Program that we have in the Self-Help Group Federation model, I've been part of the data right from the inception, because this is a program which generates a lot of data. And we also work with corporates. We've been working for the last 2 decades. So we came up with this social returns on investment study. So we've studied data over the last 1.5 decades on how it's impacted women. And also it helps corporates understand what is the return, the social returns on investment that it gave. And DST is a support organization. We work with a lot of small NGOs in Maharashtra. And I work on the theme of building bridges and enabling partnerships. So what happens is, like if one of us attends this sort of a training program, then we are able to carry these inputs back to the smaller grassroots NGOs and see how it can be enabled there. So I'm really excited about being here. Thank you.
Namaste, myself in an organization Security-Con. Security-Con is working in Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, Delhi, and some little work in Chhattisgarh also. So Security-Con is working 3 themes, major themes: economic justice and livelihood and institution development. So I look after their unit called Civil Society Building, where I engage in networking, advocacy, policy, lobbying, liaising with other government departments and small NGOs there. I have very little experience on data, but I look forward to this workshop. There is, I think, much more to learn here. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. This is Brishti, and I'm from Youth for Unity and Voluntary Action, YUVA. So we are also a 35-year-old organization working across in 7 cities. And the thematic that we engage with is on urban policy and governance. And my work is more with the generation of evidence-based research and advocacy, calling out advocacy agenda with different stakeholders. My experience has been with qualitative data, but I'm really looking forward to engage with numbers, and excited to be here. Thank you.
Good morning, all. I'm Vishwanathan from India HIV/AIDS Alliance, based at Delhi. Our organization works in HIV, TB, health and rights, and then harm reduction also. We are working across India, as well as we are also having harm reduction advocacy project in the region. We are working in 5, 6, 7 countries. And then I'm actually the strategic information manager and having experience dealing with data around 20 years. And then we are actually so collecting more data, like we are closely coordinated with NACO and other organizations. We are dealing with like 1.5 or 2 million data also in program data, as well as we do researchers, assessment, operational researchers, and then other research activities also in our organization. Thanks.
Good morning. I'm Renuka Srinivasan. I'm a senior program manager with the European Union Delegation Office here in India. I mainly manage projects on human rights that the EU funds through NGOs. Today I'm here to be a participant more than anything else because my experience working with data is quite limited other than looking at reports and data that our project partners submit. So I want to also learn. Thank you.
Good morning. Myself Chandrakanta, working with the Center for Social Equity and Inclusion. I'm their program coordinating the program and also part of many researchers as we CSCI are doing the policy advocacy too. So as a part of many researchers, in last 4 years I'm engaged with the somewhere qualitative and the quantitative data as well. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Catherine. I'm with International Justice Mission, and my role has been with monitoring and evaluation of our program that does both advocacy and rehabilitation and rescue of victims. So we do a little, we've just begun the process of monitoring and evaluating our project for the next 3 years. So looking forward to see how, or hearing from you, how to do quantitative and qualitative data analysis better. So thank you for having me.
Hi, sorry. Good morning. My name is Aditi Joshi. I'm an intern at the UN Resident Coordinator's Office.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Razi Alam, Secretary Vikas Foundation in Jharkhand. I have 25 years experience in the field of data collection and analysis and also research work with the support of Oxfam, Cretas, and Christian Aid. So, thank you.
Good morning to all. My name is Tamil Arisi. I'm coming from Chennai, representing Human Rights Advocacy and Research Foundation and also SDG Watch Tamil Nadu. I am a program in charge for SDG related programs. Past 2 years, I have experience with data.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Rahul, and I represent National Campaign on Dalit Human Rights. And I work in the capacity of Research and Campaign Officer. And I have experience about 4 years on SDG and SDG processes and data. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Myself Priyadarshi, coming from Pune, representing Manuski organization. We are working mostly on human rights and special component plan and tribal sub-plan for Adivasis, Dalits and Adivasis. I look forward for this training program because when we try to see data from scheduled caste and scheduled tribe point of view, most of the segregated data is missing. So I see a way forward from this workshop. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Juanita from Arpan. I'm sorry I arrived a little late. Basically, at Arpan, we work towards preventing child sexual abuse. We run a personal safety education program where we work directly in schools. We're basically based out of Mumbai, where we work with around 200 schools directly. In that program, we work with parents, teachers. First, we do an awareness session with them, and then we do classroom sessions with children, where we basically teach them skills, language to participate in their own safety and to seek help if they find themselves in an unsafe situation. So how do you seek help and who do you go to? And in that program, we also have a team of counselors, psychologists who provide healing services to victims and survivors of child sexual abuse. So if any child discloses an experience of inappropriate behavior or sexual abuse after the classroom sessions when we do the one-on-one interaction with each child who participated in that, in those lesson plans, then we either refer the child to the in-house counselor in the school, or if they do not have one, then to our team of counselors at Urban. And then we close the loop again by doing another session, 45 minutes of session with parents and teachers of that batch. So that's what we do in Bombay directly. And outside Bombay, we train trainers, teachers and other people to take the personal safety education program to different, to their own environments in different parts of the country. Yeah. Very poor. Very poor. It's just that quantitative data, basically. I have not myself collected and analyzed quantitative data, but I've used the data presented by others in my advocacy efforts. But I have collected qualitative data, which I have published in books and different journals, which have been used for further advocacy, particularly in the field of sex, prevention of sex trafficking. In my earlier, before I joined Urban, that's what I did. Now I'm focusing on child sexual abuse.
Okay. Good morning. My name is K.D. Maiti. I work with UNICEF India here in Delhi office. The number of years that I have worked on data is probably since I started working. For long years, I work on data and data systems. And I hope we will have interesting interactions with all of you. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Pragya Pranjali from UNICEF Delhi office, and I'm associated with data and data systems for almost a decade now. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Sateta. I also work for India HIBS Alliance. We're also working with Global Fund supported project across the country, and I'm there working as a technical officer for the strategic information management team. So considerably donors funded project, and with the government, we're dealing with quite a large scale data. Thank you.
साथियों नमस्कार, मैं डॉक्टर ममता जैन फ्रॉम झांसी उत्तर प्रदेश। मैं उपमान महिला संस्थान के साथ काम कर रही हूँ बुंदेलखंड में।
My name is Deepak Nikatal. Good morning. I am basically a research manager of Asia Dalit Rights Forum. My experience with data is because I'm basically a researcher and I've been doing various work on data, especially looking at the SDGs and how data could fix into the entire narrative of leaving no one behind, and specifically looking at SDGs like SDG 4, SDG 6, SDG 5, SDG 10, and SDG 16. Thank you.
Morning. I'm Devendra Verma. I'm Senior Statistical Advisor with UNRCO. I'm former DG CSO and also now the member of the committee which is looking into Global Hunger Index constituted by Government of India.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Tanzan Otsal, and I'm interning with the UNRCO.
Good morning. My name is Rinita Nayak. I work on social inclusion policy in the UN Resident Coordinator's Office.
Good morning and welcome everybody. My name is Meenakshi. I work on SDGs at the UN Resident Coordinator's Office. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Lubna from Vadanatodo Abhiyan. When it comes to data, we have been using some numbers in our advocacy as well as reports. But when it comes to analysis and visualization, basically no to it. Yeah.
Hello, my name is Aditi Anand. I am the Research and Documentation Officer for Vadanatodo. I have considerable experience with qualitative data and some experience with quantitative data also.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Archana and I'm working on disaster management with the UNRCO.
Hello, good morning. My name is Yang and I'm from the communications team at the UN Resident Coordinator's Office.
Hi, I'm Shuchita. I work with the UNRCO's office.
So I think when we talked about this whole workshop, the whole idea behind the workshop is government collects data, a lot of data, but it is not adequate, it is not enough. Kafi nahi hai to talk about all the people in our country, no? many people get left out in the data. And since civil society is really spread out, अलग-अलग जगह पर हम हैं, we are in with the most vulnerable communities, can we learn or can we build our capacities to create this data from communities जिनके बारे में जानकारी या डेटा नहीं है? Can we build this data? अगर हम डेटा कलेक्ट करते हैं तो what should we be careful about collecting data? And how do we analyze it? How do we present it? क्योंकि डेटा हम क्यों कलेक्ट करते हैं? हम डेटा इसीलिए कलेक्ट करते हैं कुछ बदलाव के लिए, कुछ कुछ changes के लिए, communities के लिए. So the whole purpose of this workshop is really to help all of us to fill the data gaps that is available nationally, to focus on communities and people that are not getting captured in the data. And जैसे अभी तक बात हुआ है, many of us collect some level of data. I know all of us collect some data in the field for our reports, but may not be very large data. But like we said, in collecting data, in analyzing data, in then presenting this data and using it for advocacy, we face challenges. So this session, it will be helpful for us to just discuss, because आप सबने already challenges को लिखा है, थोड़ा सा अगर बता सकते हैं कि ये challenges क्या है? Can we look at what are the challenges we have experienced in our field, in our work, when we collect data or analyze data or when we want to present data? So if people can just talk about the challenges, it will give Pankaj a better understanding on how this whole workshop, we can design it better and ensure that all of us take back some things that we want to take back. So it's like an open session. Please feel free, जो भी language है, हिंदी अंग्रेजी भी नहीं है, तमिल भी हो सकता है, तेलुगु भी हो सकता है, you can still speak. Somebody or the other can translate, will not be a problem. It's a multi-language place, so don't worry about languages, except Manipuri and maybe. Yeah, anyone, just to say, in our work, where have been the challenges of trying to collect or visualize? Yes, Murli.
I think one of the very common challenges we as civil society organizations face is that the data that we see in the different departments' websites does not match with the realities on the ground. For example, ODF and access to toilet. So we see many villages, districts being declared as ODF, which means that everybody has got access to toilet. But when you actually look at the ground situation, there are many people not having toilet, not having access to toilet. So when you want to represent the sanitation needs of certain marginalized communities, this creates a big challenge, because on the government data, it says the 100% community is covered, but there are still lots of population not having access. Okay. So that's the kind of issue.
Data, that challenge that we have. Any other challenge? Yes, Deepak.
Hi. One of the major challenge which I have seen during the data collection itself is that there is lack of disaggregation of data. So there may be a lot of data sets, but it's not disaggregated on the needs of the certain marginalized communities. For example, women. Mostly you can find data, but about tribals, Dalits, peoples with disabilities, and all those, there is no specific disaggregated data, so which could be useful for using as a effective mechanism for advocacy.
So one, you've said that the data that we see on the ground is not what is reflected in the government data. Another one is the data that we need for working on our communities is really not available at that level of the government data. Yes.
There are multiple sources where data is presented on the government website. Like an example, if we go through Economics and Statistics Department annual report, the data on educational enrollment of students from scheduled caste says something very different. If you go through the Education Department website, the data available is very different. And if you go through social justice, where the scholarships or apprenticeships are being provided, the data is very different. So when we try to advocate on the issues, there is a multiple, different
information.
set of data available. and government doesn't listen to what you are saying.
Yeah, I just want to bring one point here. I know there are lots of issues with the government data and what we can see. Maybe we'll have one or two more people to just touch upon government data. उसके बाद हम अपनी data collection में हमें क्या challenges आती है. We'll sort of focus more on that because that's what we would like to learn a little more. One or two people more on the larger government data, and then we will look at हमारी collection और हमारी usage में किस तरह की challenges हमें आती है. Yes.
What I have seen is when we are trying to
put the mic on. Yeah, I think
it's on. Hello, it's not working. Okay, can everyone?
Yeah, I think we can all hear. Yes. Unless you want recording.
Gender-based violence, when we are doing interviews or trying to do case studies, if the respondent says, I do not want this to be recorded in audio, right? Video to बहुत कुछ की बात है, audio we did not want it to be recorded. And then they say you cannot use it now. एक वो हो सकता है. And it has not happened to me, but often people I've worked with, I have seen how when they present the case study or the interview at a public forum, respondent herself or himself will come up and say, I never said something like that. I don't know where they got the consent from. I never gave any consent. I don't know whose signature that is. I never said anything. Secondly, as urban, when we do trainings with adults on understanding child sexual abuse and handling first level intervention, we see while conducting the workshop, there is a shift in attitude and knowledge. No matter how slight, we see a shift. But in a post-test tool, that is not captured. We are struggling with that. We do not know how to capture that shift in attitude and knowledge in the post-test tools. If we are able to, then it will help us a lot in our advocacy efforts,
Thank you. I can see a lot of hands. Please repeat your hands in case I don't sort of call out immediately.
One problem we have faced is the difficulty in eliciting data, especially regarding certain sensitive areas. Now, for instance, we are trying to collect data on domestic workers on sexual harassment in their workplaces. We found this issue exists, but then the respondents are not forthcoming with data. That is one. The other is they try also to hide, not sensitive areas, but then something that in other words, the reliability
of the data.
Of actually that even if we know the respondents well, we interact with them, there is difficulty in reliability.
So sensitive areas and reliability of the data that we collect is something that we have. We have some hands from that table. Yeah.
As per my experience with data, again the sunset of the data. Sometimes like we do the digitally data collection and responses we got, and sometimes we feel like it is a repetition or duplication of the data. So there is sometimes doubt that this data is okay or not. That was one challenge I faced during my data analysis. And second one, like if we do data collection, because I have that experience both sides, we do data collection, the process we made very nicely, but when we go to the practically there in the field, there was very much different scenario. So I just really want to learn how to alert ourselves in a different situation to when we are or anybody collecting the data. That was my point, and it was always challenging that every field or everywhere it was different situations for me to be. What kind of things need to be in mind?
Based on the context, how do we look at? Yes, Renuka.
It's more from a donor perspective, actually.
Can we have the mic circulating around? No, the one that hand mic. Okay, just a little louder, maybe.
No, I'm coming from a donor perspective. So we know that the government data is not complete or is not sufficient. But when we get civil society-led data, there is always this thing that is it, authentic, reliable, and etc., etc. So somewhere maybe because it's one project or one organization leading the data, and there's another one doing something similar somewhere else. So is there, maybe, I mean, what I'm trying to say is if we can also, during these 2 days, look at ways to, I'm not saying certify, but can there be some way of maybe peer reviewing or looking at or authenticating data and mechanisms like that? Because I think that, because, I mean, something like on those lines have to happen or develop for CSO-led data to be also, you know, recognized and accepted.
I see 2 points in what you're saying. One is because most CSOs collect very small data. How can we really sort of look at extrapolate it in any form? That's one. And then, of course, comparability, peer review, kind of something. Yes, Prashti.
Hi. So, one of the issue I think that. Okay, all right. Am I audible? I think it's making it. Okay, so the thing is, one is of course the fact that you know how to cull out the correct data or like the accurate data, in the sense that you know it also has to do with methodology, like how are we designing methodology to you know kind of target the data that we want to look at. And we work with urban poor, so there are a lot of intersectionalities associated in that context. So how do we analyze or look at those cross dynamics to you know kind of get the accurate data that we are looking at, one. And another one is obviously the fact that you know CSOs collect a lot of data, but to also look at co-sharing the data, because there is a lot of data, but where is the data is again another thing. So you know how do we create or look at creating a common platform or like co-share the data rather than collecting the same data again and again. So these are some of the
Okay, that's a new point. Yes, Alok. Yeah. Right.
मुझे लगता है एक बात जो आपने कही कि डेटा की जो ऑथेंटिसिटी है, सीएसओ जो कलेक्ट करते हैं उस वो कितना उस पे कितना मतलब विश्वास किया जा सकता है, एक सवाल तो ये है। दूसरा सवाल, कई बार जो ज़मीनी स्तर पर जो ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस काम कर रहे हैं ग्रास रूट लेवल पे, उनके सामने बड़ा चैलेंज इस तरह का आता है कि जैसे डोमेस्टिक वायलेंस पे, जैसे आपने भी कहा कि किसी महिला से अगर बात करनी है तो वो आज मैं अगर उनसे बात कर रहा हूँ तो हो सकता है वो अपनी बात कहें, लेकिन अगर मैं वही बात मान लीजिए कभी ग्रुप डिस्कशन में कर रहा हूँ तो वो अपनी बात कहने में बड़ा हेजिटेट करेंगी। दूसरा प्रेशर ये होता है कि हमेशा ये देखा जाता है कि ग्रास रूट पे अगर किसी गांव में किसी छोटे कस्बे में अगर जाते हैं बात करने, तो बहुत हद तक चीज़ें पॉलिटिकली बड़ी इन्फ्लुएंस करती है। अगर मैं ऐसा कह दूंगा तो मेरे सरपंच मुझे ऐसा कहेंगे, या मैं ऐसा कह दूंगी तो मेरे पॉलिटिकली ये होगा। और कई बार ऐसा भी होता है कि कुछ लोग किसी एक व्यक्ति को टारगेट करके कि देखिए हमारे यहाँ के सरपंच हैं, वो तो उनको हटाना है इस बार, तो उसके लिए जो कुछ कहना है नेगेटिव बताओ, गांव में कुछ नहीं हुआ, हमारे कुछ नहीं हो रहा है क्योंकि हमारे एमएलए ऐसे हैं, क्योंकि हमारे ये हैं, तो उनको उनके लिए कैसे ऐसा एनवायरनमेंट बिल्ड किया जाए। तो ये, और वही बात अगर हम किसी और व्यक्ति से करते हैं तो कुछ और कहानी निकल के आती है। तो कई बार ये इस तरह के जो सोशल पॉलिटिकल जो प्रेशर कहीं ना कहीं हमारी साइकोलॉजी में काम करते हैं, उससे भी जो
डेटा
विश्वास का सवाल है डेटा पे, वो खड़ा होता है।
One minute. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd just like to add to what Renu and said. So we've seen a very different environment. So we were doing a domestic worker study. So if you looked at the individual forms, they did not really cull out any of the challenges. But when we did the focus group discussion, and in the focus group discussion, we also went into verification of data. And because one of the women spoke up, the others were more ready to speak. So it works both ways. And another issue I think that we have among CSOs is that these studies are not published and not shared. So multiple organizations are working in the same target population and collecting the similar sort of socioeconomic data. So somewhere I feel there is a need to collaborate. And see, we don't disclose the personal details, but the findings of the study, what are the challenges in the community that all of us can collaborate and address.
Okay. Okay. Yes, Razi. माइक के अंदर। आप बैठकर बात कर लीजिए।
जो ग्रासरूट लेवल पर
चल रहा है।
तो 3 प्रॉब्लम आ रही है हमारे सामने। एक होता है कि टाइमिंग को लेकर, जो हमारा टाइम दिया जाता है वो उतने टाइम में वो डाटा कलेक्शन नहीं हो पाता है, क्वेश्चनर इतने सारे रहते हैं, तो एक ये प्रॉब्लम हुआ। दूसरा प्रॉब्लम है कि जो कोई अगर हम जेंडर पर कुछ कलेक्शन करना चाहते हैं तो उसमें बहुत सारी समझ उनको नहीं होती है, महिलाओं को। इसमें उनका क्वेश्चन होता है कि नो 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 करके हो जाता है, तो हम वो क्वेश्चनर कैसे बनाएं उसमें, ठीक है। तीसरा आता है कि गांव में ये देखा जा रहा है कि वो जब महिला से पूछते हैं तो पुरुष काफ़ी इंटरफेयर कर जाते हैं, तो वहाँ पर फिर थोड़ा सा आंसर सही नहीं हो पा रहा वहाँ पर, इस तरह की समस्या आती है।
Okay. Okay. So, yes.
Last time we have conducted one study in 100 schools in Andhra Pradesh to know the accessing the health services and child marriage status in the schools. We had collected the information from 100 schools, but there is so many schools the children they perform the child marriages. After completion of the study, we went to the government officials and submit that report. They are quietly deny the data. But in the grassroots level, actually, it was happened. The students, those who are child marriage happened, they are came forward. The response clearly told that.
So the data that we collect is really not then acceptable within the larger framework of the data.
Also, they asked the police department never registered the child marriage case anywhere.
Yes.
So that's why the government not treated validity to this
Okay.
info data.
Okay. Think Catherine? Can you just speak into the mic?
We work with partners who do the work in the field, and I think the greatest challenge.
Little louder.
The greatest challenge that we've been facing is a lot of their data is like written in notepads or like papers somewhere, and they're out in the district to come back and actually computerize their notes to feed into a system. I think it's a process issue and also a buy-in issue to really see, hey, this data is actually being fed into something else. What happens is there's a lot of data gap because there's a lot of work that's done in the field, but it's not reflected as such, both in terms of what is happening with the survivor and the progress of the project. So I think I would love to hear from people how they've sort of developed innovative ways to deal with that disconnect in some ways.
Okay. Yes.
So I work with faith communities, and I think one of the biggest challenges that we've had, especially like large festivals like the Kumbh Mela, and measuring the impact of faith leaders' messages on large communities. And part of it has been just how do you measure an impact of not just their ability to send a message to the people there, but also because, for example, they get covered by live channels, and those channels are broadcast in so many countries. And so when you say how many people have your messages touched, how do you measure those things? So with faith communities, that's just one example, but many examples of exactly how do you measure, what are the parameters by which you measure the impact of their messages.
Okay. Yeah, I think Chandrakanta.
In
the mic.
I just want to add something which is personally I felt many times when during the data collection, that sometimes you feel like you are interviewing somewhere, some atrocity happened, then you get so emotional, or sometimes you're so pissed off because of the many situation emerge. So I really want to be understand how to deal with that, and like how to even tell to the other people also how they will take care of these barriers, which is sometimes it become a barrier due to your biases or emotion. Data collection get effect or possibility to get effect. So that was mine.
Yes.
हेलो,
आप बताइए और फिर उत्तर दे दीजिए।
ग्रास रूट लेवल पर जो डाटा कलेक्शन की प्रॉब्लम है, ज़्यादातर अगर मैंने अभी हम किसानों के साथ काम कर रहे हैं, सर्वे कर रहे हैं, तो हमने देखा कि वो डाटा जो है ना गवर्नमेंट की स्कीम के अकॉर्डिंग लोग उसका आंसर देने की कोशिश करते हैं। अगर हम देखें कि कितनी क्रॉप्स अभी सूख गई हैं और उनका क्या आपको पैसा मिलना है, बहुत सारे लोग जब अभी 2-3 तरह के क्वेश्चन निकल गया, मैं उसको वापस चैलेंजेस को रिपीट करूँगी। अगर हम इस तरीके की स्कीम के बियॉन्ड करने जा रहे हैं, तो लोग ये सोचते हैं कि जो मेरा नुकसान नहीं हुआ है उससे ज़्यादा मुझे लाभ मिलना चाहिए। तो वो डाटा को, जो डाटा लेने वाला है उसमें कितना गलत है कितना सही है, वो हम खुद ही उसमें बहुत कंफ्यूज हो जाते हैं, क्योंकि उस व्यक्ति, जो जवाब देने वाला व्यक्ति, उसकी मंशा और आत्मीयता को हम नहीं समझ पाते कि ये किस लिए दे रहा है। बट थोड़ा थोड़ा समझ में आता है, तभी ये मुझे चैलेंज समझ में आ रहा है। दूसरी चीज़, अगर हम जेंडर बेस देखें, डोमेस्टिक वायलेंस का देखें, डाउरी का देखें, चूँकि मैं गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया की तरफ से 1997 से फैमिली काउंसलिंग सेंटर रनअप कर रही हूँ झांसी में। जब डोमेस्टिक वायलेंस के लिए हम लोग जाते हैं और पता करते हैं, तो बहुत से लोग अभी भी जो सामाजिक प्रेशर है और दूसरी चीज़ जो फैमिली का दबाव है, उनको लगता है कि अगर ये डाटा, ये चीज़ मैं कह दूंगा या कह दूंगी तो मेरे घर की स्थितियाँ और बिगड़ने वाली हैं। रियलिटी में वो डाटा, खासकर जेंडर और डोमेस्टिक वायलेंस का, निकल के नहीं आ पाता। तो दो अलग तरीके के चैलेंजेज हैं। एक, स्कीम्स का गलत तरीके से लाभ उठाने के लिए लिस्ट में नाम बढ़ाने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं। दूसरा है जो रियल में दुखी हैं, जिनका डाटा निकल के आना चाहिए, वो सोशल और पारिवारिक दबाव के कारण से वो चीज़ें नहीं बता पा रहे हैं, नहीं कह पा रहे हैं। और मैं इसमें एक सजेशन भी मैं जो अप्लाई करती हूँ, मैं क्या करती हूँ, जहाँ हमें डोमेस्टिक वायलेंस का डाटा लेना होता है, हम उसी पड़ोस, उसी मोहल्ले में 3-4 बार जाया करते हैं। अगर मुझे रियलिटी का डाटा उठाना है, तो वो जो फर्स्ट डे लेडी या जो भी बच्चा, लड़की ने हमें अलग दृष्टि से देखा, कुछ क्वेश्चन किया, देन हमें अपना टारगेट समझ में आता है कि यहाँ से कोई चीज़ निकल के आने वाली है। हम 2-3 बार जब जाते हैं, ऐसे स्कूलों में भी हम हाई स्कूल इंटर की लड़कियों के साथ डोमेस्टिक वायलेंस की जब बात करते हैं, तो हमें 2 से 3 टाइम्स वहाँ जाना होता है, तब वो हमारा जो क्लाइंट्स है वो हम तक निकल के आता है, रियल डाटा अगर हमें चाहिए। ओके, थैंक यू।
So I just would like to highlight two challenges which we are really facing it. One is the data quality. When the civil society collects the data, how quality it is, how we are actually ensuring the quality is one thing. When we discussed about the reliability, sure. So we need to see that how sophisticated we collect the data, how methodologically we are using the data collection process, so that so we can ensure the quality. That is one challenge so we face. And then another one is the data utilization. So what for we are collecting the data? We are collecting so much data, but are we really using all those data for our purpose? So it is most of the times, so when the data collectors or the program implementers in the field, so when they are collecting the data, they collect it for the reporting purpose mainly. But how are we using it for strategic implementation or changes in the programs, or so how we are going to use the advocacy, or right? These are the challenges is really, so is major challenges. When you go to the grassroots level, they do actually, why are they collecting this information? If they don't know that, then at the top level, we cannot make the strategic planning. So that actually, so we need to bring this challenges, the issues into the mind of the person who's implementing, then, so you can actually ensure the quality and then implementation.
Thank you. Bablu?
Thank you, Annie. I mean, we also share many of the concerns expressed, but I want to highlight one very specific issue that people working in the conflict areas, and particularly collecting data on 16.1, the violence and death issues, is the sensitivity of these data and the security of these data become a very big issue. Let me point out one example. In 1988, there was this big operation called the Operation Bluebird, wherein about 28 people died. And people have moved the High Court and submitted affidavit of about 10,000 details of this. Now, in 2018, the High Court said all these data are gone from the registry of the High Court. That neither have the petitioner get any of this, left with any of this information. And today, 28 years after the incident, the deputy collector of the DC of the district and the superintendent is asked to reconstruct this, which is becoming an impossible task. Today, we sit on at least 2,000 cases of these killings. And fortunately, because of the intervention by the Supreme Court, this is given some sanctity. It's no longer just NGO data because we have submitted all this to. So an issue that people working in these areas, particularly 16.1 and conflict-related issue is the data security. How do we ensure that these data are preserved, archived, and secured so that because of various factors, and since these data can be very detrimental to the very powerful and people who want to erase this data, this can be an issue. And I just want to flag off this particular issue for people working in these areas.
Thank you. Do you want to just capture and then see where are the gaps or just continue? Continue, okay. Yeah.
अभी हम लोगों ने ट्रैफिकिंग को लेकर गांव में हमारे
बैठकर बात कर लीजिए माइक के अंदर।
नहीं ठीक है, तो हम लोगों ने जो डाटा कलेक्शन किया है गांव का पूरा फैमिली से मिलकर उनको, तो उसमें 23 लड़कियां जो दिल्ली में ही आई हैं, ठीक है। तो हम लोगों ने जब गवर्नमेंट को दिया तो उस डाटा को मानने को तैयार नहीं है गवर्नमेंट।
ओके।
दूसरा चीज़ है राइट टू फूड कैंपेन, एक फोरम हम लोगों का झारखंड में है, तो हम लोगों ने भी जो भूख से मौत के बारे में कुछ हम समझ रहे थे, तो पलामू में 2 लोगों की मौत हुई थी, सॉरी एक पलामू में एक गिरिडीह में, तो पूरा हम लोग पूरा कमेटी के साथ मिलकर उसके फैमिली के साथ मिलकर मुखिया के साथ मिलकर हम लोग पूरा इन्फॉर्मेशन लिए, क्योंकि सचमुच उसकी भूख से ही मौत हुई, लेकिन गवर्नमेंट उसको मानने को तैयार नहीं है। तो हमारा डाटा कलेक्शन कहाँ क्या होगा फिर वो?
லாஸ்ட் 5 months வந்து நாங்கள் வந்து ஒரு அரௌண்ட் 1000 ஹவுஸ் ஹோல்டு டேட்டாஸ் வந்து கலெக்ட் பண்ணியிருந்தோம். மெயின் சேலஞ்ச் வந்து எங்களுக்கு என்ன இருந்ததுன்னா டேட்டா க்ளீனிங், அந்த பார்ட் வந்து பெரிய சேலஞ்சாக இருந்தது. தென் ஆஃப்டர் நாங்கள் எங்களோட ரிப்போர்ட் கார்டு வந்து ரிலீஸ் பண்ணதுக்கப்புறம் என்ன ப்ராப்ளம் ஆச்சுன்னா பிளானிங் கமிஷன்லேருந்து வந்திருந்தாங்க. ஓவரால் 10 கம்யூனிட்டிஸ்லேருந்து ஃபார் எக்ஸாம்பிள் வந்து பர்த் ரெஜிஸ்ட்ரேஷன் வந்து ஆவரேஜ் எடுக்கும்போது 25 தான் இருந்தது. நாங்கள் ஸ்டடி பண்ணனா அந்த லெஃப்ட் பிஹைண்ட் கம்யூனிட்டிஸில் அது வந்து அவங்க வந்து கவர்மெண்ட் சைடு வந்து அக்செப்ட் பண்ணலை. அப்போ நாங்கள் என்ன வந்து ரியலைஸ் பண்ணினோன்னா எனிவே சிவில் சொசைட்டி ஆர்கனைசேஷன்ஸ் எடுக்கிற எந்த டேட்டாஸும் வந்து கவர்மெண்ட் வந்து ஏதாவது ஒரு டூல் வச்சு கண்டிப்பாக வந்து இது சரியில்லைன்னு சொல்லி கண்டிப்பாக ரிஜெக்ட் பண்ண தான் போகிறாங்க. அப்போ நமக்கும் அந்த அளவுக்கு கெப்பாசிட்டி இல்லை. இப்போது எவ்வளோ இப்போ தமிழ்நாட்டில் 7 crore பீப்புள் இருக்காங்கன்னா 7 crore பீப்புளும் எங்களால் சர்வே பண்ண முடியாது. அதுக்கு இண்டிவிஜுவல் சர்வே தான் நம்ம பண்ணணும். அப்போ நம்ம என்ன இங்கே ட்ரை பண்ணுறோம் அப்படின்னா இந்த நம்ம கலெக்ட் பண்ண இந்த டேட்டாஸை யூஸ் பண்ணிவிட்டு அந்த இஷ்யூவை வந்து நம்ம ஹைலைட் பண்ணணும். ஸோ அதுதான் எங்களோட மோட்டிவாக இருக்கும். இந்த கம்யூனிட்டியில் பர்டிகுலராக இந்த லெஃப்ட் பிஹைண்ட் கம்யூனிட்டியில் இந்த இஷ்யூஸ் இருக்குது அப்படிங்கிறத ஹைலைட் பண்ணுறதுக்கு இந்த டேட்டா நம்ம யூஸ் பண்ணிக்கலாமே ஒழிஞ்சு கம்ப்ளீட் டேட்டாஸ் வந்து நம்ம சிவில் சொசைட்டி ஆர்கனைசேஷன்ஸ் பண்ணணும்னு நினைக்கிறது வந்து பெரிய சேலஞ்சாக இருக்கும்னு நினைக்கிறேன்.
Edwin, can you translate it very briefly?
Yeah, when we did the data collection from different communities, we did that in Tamil Nadu for 10 communities, about 1,000 families. Now, one of our findings and one of our most difficult things was to clean up the data. And even after cleaning up the data, because some of the findings were, even for us, it was very astounding, actually, very, very surprising. Tamil Nadu is supposed to have 100% birth registration. In some communities, it was just 20 something. 25. What did you say? Tamilasi?
25%. 25.
In Muslim community, 8.
8. Yeah, in one community, it was actually single digit, 8. Now, and that is 8 out of 100 families, okay? And 8 were not registered. We cross-checked it many, many times. The government refused to accept that data. Now,
8 were not registered or 8 were registered?
8 were registered.
92 are not registered.
Not registered.
92 children born or 92 families?
92
Nine-
families from
92 families. So not
Families.
that all the children's number is there. That's a different. Okay.
So now the government is in denial of many kinds of data. That's the main problem for us. Tamil Nadu has got the highest number of sewer deaths. But yet, you know, the manual scavenging, they get into the drains and die. Yeah. The highest number. But officially, the government says there is no manual scavenging in Tamil Nadu. When the National Commission for Safai Karmacharis came to Tamil Nadu and did a census, and some people reported that they were doing manual scavenging, the collector called them, threatened them, and made them take it back. Now, see, I'm not very surprised. We have a governor in this country who thinks that 105 plus 4 is 145. Yeah, so that is, I'm not very surprised about that. But the thing is that the expectations that we go with, now that is what she was trying to say. We have 100% authentic data. The government is in denial. We go conduct this very intensive process because we go sit with the community for a week. Yeah? We raise their expectations. We tell them, see, we are just coming for a survey, everything, all that we can do, but expectations are raised. And then the government is in denial. Yeah? What do we do? That is her point.
I think a lot of issues have come up in terms particularly, if I just recollect some of the things. One clearly is the whole sensitivity about information. Another thing, whether the community itself is giving us the right information or not, because there may be political motivations behind it. Another thing that we said is like, does the person who's collecting the data really understand what and how they are collecting for and get an insight into it? Otherwise, they are just collecting whatever comes to their mind. So that reliability of the data becomes very difficult. We find also that the amount of data that we are collecting is very small to really make large assumptions around them. Government does not seem to be accepting the data that we collect. They have their own reasons. But even when we are sure that this data is very correct, the government does not want to accept that data. There's a big gap between our data and what the government data is. Then the whole issue about, you know, legal matters and security of data, all that. Then there was a question on questionnaire. How do we actually prepare a proper questionnaire and execute the questionnaire? That was one of the issues that came up. There was also like the issue about so many sets of data being collected by so many different people. One, there is no collaboration or coordination across these various things, various data sets that are coming. So how much are we then able to use it for our advocacy and for larger purposes? These are some of the issues that came up. Anything else, Pankaj, that?
Yeah, broadly those are, but I wanted to ask all of you a question. So we are at two ends of the spectrum. At one end are people who are not able to collect data effectively or analyze it or utilize it. At the other end, there are people who have collected credible data, but are not able to get the government to accept the reality which our data is showing us. Yeah. What do we do about these two things? One, those who are not able to collect or who do not feel equipped to collect data, I want to ask them, what would you think we should do? Build our capacities, whatever are your solutions there. And the other more important question is, you have data, but you're not getting government to listen to it. What is our solution to that? Okay, so anybody wants to start with the first one? Yes, please.
One is data, how the government or somebody is actually accepting the data, the reliability and then acceptability. That is really a challenge one, because we work with the government very closely. So in terms of the HIV, we worked, and then So now we are really supporting them to ensure that data quality and utilization. How it becomes, it is actually the trust. How we build the trust, that is actually, so when we have not actually started on its own, and then, so implemented the project or collected the data. We go with them, this is a problem, and then we go with them, along with them, right from the beginning of the stage, data collection or data collection tool designing, and then, so it is actually the buy-in will be more. So that is how we felt like, around 2.9 million data in India registered PLHI, we were there. So it was actually, and then we found it very difficult to clean the data. And then we sat together and then designed the plan, how we can find out that how we can clean it, how we can analyze the data. Then, so the results are actually accepted by both sides. Then the decision has been taken. This is the one way actually, so when we are designing, when you are planning for data collection, we need to go with the system so that, so they will also own this data at one stage. So though it will give you a different pictures, but at least, so they will recognize the data, though it is not going to be disseminated at larger level if it is really going to affect the different way. But they will recognize, they will start thinking to use the data for the program planning. That's how it is.
Thank you.
I think since we are having this discussion in the context of SDGs, data can mean anything. It's a ocean by itself. I think we need to limit the boundaries of it also. So my understanding is, I think the entire discussion has to be related to SDGs. So from that point of view, I think as civil society organizations working with the communities, we need to understand first thoroughly what is the current data collection process related to SDGs, the monitoring of progress on SDGs, etc., so that we can better utilize the available data collected on all these SDGs and understand where are the gaps in the current data collection system and how can we build those gaps. And that requires a different kind of capacity building process. I don't think we can take it for granted that every civil society organization has the capacity to be able to generate data in the way it is required to fill the gaps. I think those are two different aspects that we should take into consideration. How can we engage ourselves actively in the entire process, understanding what are the current data collection systems? I think those are the two areas.
So what I need to reflect regarding this data and SDG. So now the Niti Aayog has produced a report, localization of SDG, early experiences from India. So they have tried to bring 62 indicators which has the local relevance. And when we are talking about the primary data, we are obviously talking about how we can better relate the data and the system towards a link up with the SDG indicators. So when there is a scope that we can take most of the indicators locally, and we can also link up the secondary sources which is available at the local level. So, but I feel we need to discuss how can the civil society fill up the data gap which even the Niti Aayog could not reflect at the macro level. At this time, we can see the SDGs from the local context. We know that constitutionally there is a scope to integrate SDGs in the local context. So what is our role in generating data and what is our role? Because we see that there is a lot of resistance regarding the methodology and the way we are collecting data. So how do we behave to that kind of resistance when we are linking our data system to the SDGs? So that one way we can discuss. And the second way, we people generate a lot of qualitative data. So now it is the time when the people do not have time to read those qualitative reports. So how to minimize those subjective attributes into smaller nodes? That is when we communicate data. So this is a big challenge for us to communicate minimum, keeping the sense intact. So that is the way also we can focus. Thank you.
I'm just thinking I'll just go over the next session so that we have an understanding of what we will go through. And because Dr. Maiti is already here, we can take more time at that session. So, जो भी बहुत सारे, can I just close it up here? Yeah. क्योंकि बहुत सारी issues आए हैं, I think there are a lot of issues which we have discussed over the next 2 days. Today and tomorrow we will be looking at some of them. आगे की, if I'm just looking at the next session is really looking at the government set of data. What is the kind of sets of data that government gathers, collects, where are the gaps as far as SDGs are concerned, and how can civil society contribute or evolve data for some of the SDG indicators. वो एक हमारी session होगा which we will take with Dr. Maiti next. After that, क्योंकि बहुत सारे लोग goal 10 and goal 16, goal 5, we work on some of these things which are very, very complex goals or complex targets for which there are not much data or not much indicators itself. So one exercise would also be to see 10 and 16 and see currently what indicators are available. And then also, because we work on the ground on many of these issues, can we identify indicators that we can actually contribute to having a greater monitoring of 10 and 16. So we will take up that 10 and 16 as one session where we'll also try to see from our ground can we build some indicators. Another thing that we will be looking at is also like we know that the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation actually is like the data scientists for us in this country. So they would also come and give us a session on what is the methodology they use, how do they collect data, where are the kind of challenges. We can also look at what are the kind of challenges we face in their data and our kind of data, and what is the national systems that are collecting. So that's one issue. Then we've looked at two ways. We've looked at household survey as one methodology for collecting data, perception survey as another methodology for collecting data, and the third thing which many of us use is also the RTI route. We can also collect some data from the government on the RTI. So we'll also have a little discussion on when we have to do a household data survey, what are the things that we need to keep in mind. If we are sort of designing a perception survey, can we have some understanding of how we can do that? So when we go back at the ground level, we are able to make some use of that data. So that's one thing. And then another session that we will be doing is also like अभी paper के साथ कोई नहीं data collect करते हैं. Lot of technology is available, lot of systems are available for us to collect data, and we also see in the ground people are more happy to collect data through technology rather than paper and pen. So there is lot of technology available. There are platforms that we can use for collecting data, free platforms, so that we'll also have a little understanding on some of these platforms and technology on how we can collect data. And then we will have one session on I think we'll focus a lot on how do we develop a questionnaire, what is the methodology to be used, how do we assess the robustness of a questionnaire, how do we assess the robustness of a perception survey. So वो practical angles को हम इस 2 दिन में और भी उसके ऊपर sessions होगा. And then we'll also have, अगर data मिल जाएगा तो उसको clean up कैसे करेंगे. I think many people also talked about cleaning up of data, analysis of data. We'll also have some session on looking at analysis and cleaning up of data. And then जो हम सब बात कर रहे थे, we are collecting data for the purpose of enhancing the communities that we work with or their access to some particular thing, whether it is gender or access to justice or livelihood or education. We have a purpose for the data collection. So how do we convince other people with our data to say that we want this purpose to be served from this data? How do we communicate the data? How can we make the information in a manner that is able to communicate and convince other people on the kind of issues that we are talking about? And so that's basically the communication and the advocacy. How do we do advocacy? So these are all the various sessions that have been planned. But in case We also have the challenges that we have already collected. But in case there is anything else, please, we will have one of these side boards where you can note down if you have some area that you think should also be taken up. Not that we may be able to take it up, but at least we know that these are areas that we want to take up. And since SDGs at least another 10 years, and after that maybe we'll have another accelerated SDGs or something like that. So we surely will need a lot of community data engagement to ensure that nobody is left behind. I think the whole purpose that civil society can contribute is looking at the whole principle of nobody is left behind and seeing how much we can bring these communities more and more into the focus and attention. So this is a beginning of this whole process, and we will really look forward to taking it into various places, with organizations, with communities, as much as we can to highlight it and bring up the authentic data. I think we are a little early, but I would feel that if there is anything, because we can go into the next session, which may need more time also. Thank you all very much for the very active participation and also the pointers that you have brought. I'm sure it will be very, very useful for the 2 days of discussion. Over to Pankaj.
Thanks. So the good news is that Mr. Mehti can answer a lot of your questions. The bad news is that we do not have enough time to cover all the topics that you raised. Okay, because this is a 2-day workshop, so please consider this as a trailer. Picture abhi baki hai mere doston. So inviting Mr. Mehti from UNICEF. He is the planning, monitoring and evaluation specialist for UNICEF and many decades of work on data. So over to you, sir. You can speak. So good morning. When I am standing here now, since I've been listening to you all sitting at the back very intently, and a sense is coming to me as if I'm showing light to the lamp. You people have so much of in-depth understanding of the challenges of the data and what data can do. So when I'm presenting, I was told to make a presentation on the system side. But some of the points that you have brought out are really challenging. So I will, in my process, in my way of presentations, I'll try and relate some of them. And those which are left out, probably I will have little time at the end where we can have one-to-one discussions on these issues that you've identified. So the topic, with your permission, if I may start the presentation, I was asked to talk about harnessing data, to give you an overview of Indian statistical system and how it harnesses data. But the main theme is leaving no one behind, which is the theme of SDG. So at the bottom, I've quoted from SDG, the main document which the countries signed, the heads of the countries signed, where it says very clearly that the agenda's goals and targets should be met for all nations, people, for all segments of the society. And that's where the theme emanates from, that this goal that we have started to traverse is for all people. The question that I was thinking, what is official statistics and how does it relate to the civil society? Generally, official statistics, as I understand and having served in the government for more than 27 years, is as if it is only for policymakers to take some decisions or certain policymakers not to take a decision. But official data is actually a service provided by the government to the civil society. At the international level, there are what we call United Nations fundamental principles on official statistics. And the first principle stays like this. It says that what we should compile should be relevant, impartial, and access to that impartial official statistics should be given to all. And especially the data that we generate with the taxpayers' money is for the public. In a democratic society, if we do not have the official statistics, then democracy's fruits are not enjoyed by all people. So this is what is most important, that the data that we generate through the official statistical system is available impartially. And what is to be done, that only these statistics with these characteristics, the statistics is to be compiled and made available in an impartial basis by the official statistical agencies, that is the National Statistics Office, the Central Statistics Office, or in your states, the Planning Department or the Director of Economic and Statistics, or all those people who are generating statistics on the taxpayers' money. That statistic should be made available to all citizens, and that's their entitlement. So therefore, the statistics that we generate with taxpayers' money is our entitlement. So we should demand for whatever statistics that we generate is made available to the people, because that's what has been generated based on the work that the government has been doing it, and also based on the resources that was made available by the people to the government to compile that statistic. So therefore, official statistics is necessary component of governance for the people, for the government. The next question that was bothering me is that why should we be so much bothered about data? And this we have been pondering in UNICEF, is that we know data is powerful. And as you mentioned in the morning, and you have been talking about it, probably this is the only tool by which we can bring change. It is such an important tool. So therefore, data is important. And in UNICEF, we believe the right data in the right hands and at the right time would lead to a better decision making, more equitable distribution of resources, and also we believe that's how we can protect the rights of the children. And most importantly, the critical disaggregated data that is required. We can talk about all kinds of data at an aggregate level, but it camouflages many of the critical information within it. So therefore, we have been advocating for it. The global agenda advocates for it. And Leave No Behind is actually advocating for a critical disaggregation of data. Why is that? Because it reveals to us those who are being left behind. So one of our advocacy points should be that we disaggregate that information as far as possible to understand who are left behind or who are hidden and we know nothing about them. Just an example, we were doing some bit of analysis in our office, and we wanted to understand what is the situation of urban poor children. Generally, you will see that lots of data are disaggregated by rural and urban. But you scratch a little bit and try to understand what is happening to the situation of urban children in our urban setup, you will see stalking revolutions. And that is what I was trying to, and I was making a presentation yesterday and I thought I'll bring these 2 slides. If you see, in terms of child mortality, we are declining. In the last 2 decades, between 2005 and 6 and 15 and 16, there has been quite a bit of decline, almost 10 percentage points. 1 percentage points we are declining every year. Still, that is a lot of deaths. In the urban area and in the rural area, you see the differential. Both are declining, but see the differential. In urban area in 2015, 10 deaths, 10 child deaths per 1,000 live births. Whereas in the rural area, almost 13 points more. That is 13 more children are dying in the families who are living in the rural areas. We kind of desegregated this urban story a little bit. And we wanted to understand what is happening in the urban poor. And we found in the urban poor families, the number of deaths per 1,000 live births is 29, which is much more than the urban story. And I have some figures from 8 mega cities. I am picking this information from the DHS survey, which is generally called the National Family Health Survey. What you find that mortality in the families of urban poor is much more than even the slums in India, right? Similarly, we wanted to understand what is the access to piped water. Now the government has come out a new program of making available piped water in every household, and they have a program. So as it is, access to piped water in India is just around 30%, even in 2015 and 16. We saw this figure for urban pretty high, around 52% in 2015 and 16. In the rural areas, it's just around 18%. That means 1 out of 5 is actually getting a piped water, 1 out of 5 households. And when we saw in the urban poor, this is just around 21. After every 100 households in the urban poor areas, just around 20 households are getting piped water. And look at what is the story in the overall urban story. This is the aggregate of urban, and this is in the urban poor families. So what I'm trying to say, this is not a presentation to tell you what is the level. What I'm trying to underline is that if you disaggregate the information that we have, you will see a stark reality which is emerging from these kinds of analysis. So we have to ask for these kinds of data and advocate with the government that when you generate your data and publish your report, can you bring out these kind of statistics? Why is it required? Because it is then they can focus the resources. Resources are limited. They can bring their focus first where things are pretty bad. We were doing a kind of a GIS mapping. We wanted to understand what is the access of social benefit programs which government runs in 3 cities. One was Bhopal, another was Kolkata, another is Mumbai. And we tried to collect data at the ward level, which is pretty difficult. The wards do not maintain the data in a manner that we wanted to maintain it. But anyway, with all the challenges of the data, the way they are maintained at the ward level or the municipalities, we did a kind of a vulnerability analysis. We developed a small index on education. So in Bhopal municipality, if you see these, the darker blocks of wards, that's where you find the vulnerability on education is pretty high. So therefore, what it means that when you are bringing your expenditure or your allocation, you try and focus on these areas before you really start spending on the southern side of it. Another example, Kolkata. We wanted to understand what is the spatial distribution of public health facilities in the Kolkata Municipal Corporation. And what do you see? that most of it are in the southern part of Kolkata's municipalities. These are the areas which are left out. So do you see the story of unequal distribution of resources and the facilities for the people of Kolkata municipalities? The last one is on Mumbai. Every year in the monsoon seasons, we hear about huge flooding, and we wanted to map a kind of a cross of floods and the wards to understand how many of these wards are affected by the floods. And you will see that these are how we have done a GIS mapping of it. 2 million slum population, almost 40% of the slum population in Mumbai are actually lying on the flood plains, where there is a reoccurrence of floods almost every year. If you do not have this information, if you are getting a broad allocation and spend it in a way that you have been spending, then probably these issues cannot be challenged. The question is again that if you do not have information at that level, you probably will not be able to do justice to your scarce resources, whether it is manpower or it is finance. So I'm reiterating what was the objective of SDG that we started with. What we started with, that if we have a sustainable development goal, development plan, what we are going to achieve or what we are aspiring to have a social economic growth, but with equity. Second is, we would aspire for peace and freedom for all people in all communities. Then we are also aspiring that the mother has given us certain resources, the consumption has to be such in balance that the resources are really kept up also for my future generations. That today we are a trustee, as Gandhiji used to mention, that we are a trustee for our next generation. So that's what all that is embedded in our SDG goal. And for that, they had 17 goals, 169 targets, and 240 indicators. So what has happened now in the last 3 years, since 2016, that the Ministry of Statistics and Niti Aayog has come out with a national indicator frame to measure the progress on SDGs. So we had 240 indicators at the global level. The Ministry of Statistics and Niti Aayog has come out with 306 indicators. Obviously, they have embedded many of the new indicators which are necessary or a priority for this indicator. Fine enough. So, and they have also identified the data sources, and considering that the indicator framework that we have at the national level is probably not too aligned to the global indicator, they have set up a committee under the Chief Statistician of India, which is Secretary Government of India, and they are in the process, a dynamic process of reviewing the national indicator in a manner that it gets more and more aligned to the global indicator, right? So of the 306 indicator, at the moment they have a baseline report. So they have identified some 191 indicators for which they have data and can report on, and quite a large number of these indicators, the values will come from the administrative data. A few will come from the survey data and things like that. But the challenge is for some of the targets which are not given in the global indicator. You know how the global targets have been set? In certain global targets is this eradicate, reduce by half. Those are the kinds of targets which are already embedded within the global framework. But there are few targets where there are no probably targets set. So it's time that government has to really look at how those target values have to be set, where there are no specific targets that has been given. So where do we have the data? we have been talking in the morning. So all my discussion that I am doing now is largely on the system side. Please note this. And at the system side, that means at the national level, we have several data sources. Largely, it comes from the central government's own data sources, which is the National Sample Service data. Then this is the sample survey, which gives us mostly the mortality estimates, the National Family Health Survey, and various other labor surveys. Then the census, which is conducted once in 10 years. Then there are special surveys. So this forms one set of data sources for reporting on the SDG indicators. Other is administrative data. The government has huge management information system data sets, which are something like you have the education database, which is called UDIS, which is collected right from the school level and aggregated up to the national level. So you have the district information, you have the state information, and I also believe you can go a little bit below the district also, even at the cluster level. So the first aggregating point on the UDIS is the cluster, which is nothing but a unit which is below the district. So first collation of the school data comes at the cluster level, then it gets aggregated at the district, from district to the state, and from the state to the national level. So it's a very huge data sets. I am not going into the quality of these data sets. There will be challenges of these data sets. Like all MIS systems all over the world, the challenges remain, but over a period of time, these challenges are actually removed or to an extent. Then there are state government surveys, then they have their own MISs, data sets and things like that. So this is how the entire thing is done. But at the bottom, you'll see that there is also certain UN data sets. So UN, or for that matter, any agency under the United Nations, do not generate, I'm underlining, they do not generate any data of their own. What do they do, you may be asking? They all collate information from these sources, largely. Collate it, harmonize it at the global level. So we have a harmonizing process which is very transparent, and that harmonized database is given to the public, and it is also retained in their databases. There will be one database, say for mortality, one database could be on nutrition, one could be on water sanitation. So there are these kinds of thematic databases, but I must tell you that they do not generate data. They rely on the national system. There is a mechanism of sharing the national data with these UN agencies. There is a cooperation, international cooperation signed between these two people, these two agencies, and how these UN data sets are created. So let us now look at a bit of the linkages. Before I move on to the linkages, let me also give you an idea. Now, the Indian statistical system that we have is pretty complex. Why I say complex? Because the linkages between the national statistical system and the state statistical system are nowhere written down. If there is any document which defines their role, is the Constitution. So keep this in mind, that if the national ministries and the Central Statistics Office or the National Statistics Office is generating certain data because it is under their mandate within the Constitution. So the statistical system in the country is bit of a federated. So every state government is independent in collecting the information on the subjects that they have been aligned to or given to under the constitutions. You must know that there are 3 lists that are given within the Constitution where it defines which are the subject areas which is within the domain of governance of the central government. Then there is a list called state list, which is defining which is the subjects to be governed by the state government. Central government cannot go and intervene in those matters. And then the fathers of the constitution, they thought there will be quite of a silo. So they brought a new list called central list. The central list, so you have now the union list, the central list, and the state list. What is called concurrent list, not the central list. The concurrent list is where the union government has an upper hand, but it also have to take a permission in a manner to move into the area of data collection in those areas. For example, census. Census is a subject area which is in the union list. So therefore, the entire process is managed by the central government within the Ministry of Home Affairs, right? But say, for example, you will have to collect something data on health. To give you an example, now the National Family Health Survey is again a data product of the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare here. But health as a subject is within the state list. Remember that? So what happens is that there is this kind of an overlap, but with the permission of the state. But as such, the surveys are within the concurrent list. On vital statistics, like for example, the sample registration system from all your vital statistics estimates are coming. Because it is a vital statistics survey, the central government has an upper hand. So it's very complex, but it's not difficult. But how does it look like? So it looks like this. So you have a national level system, which is actually led by the Ministry of Statistics. I'm telling led, but not supervised. When I will come to that, I will tell you why it is not supervised, but it is led. There's a difference in that. But then you have a state level system, right? And then there are many other autonomous institutions also, which also generate statistics. For example, RBI. Many such institutions are there in India which are autonomous. The resources goes from the Government of India's fund, but there is no dominance of these institutions on these. They decide what is to be computed, how it is to be computed. But there is an understanding. They sit together and decide what is the definition of that number that you are going to compile it. So that's what I'm saying, that you have three systems. They are independent to each other, but they are linked to each other. That you have to understand very clearly. And this is what I was trying to highlight, that the three systems are independent, yet it is interconnected and dependent intrinsically. How they are dependent? Almost 60% of the data that are generated at the state level gets fed into the national system. All that, GDP computation and many other such computation which happens, and CSO brings out many other, statistical knowledge products. The data for it comes from the state system. So there is an intrinsic relationship between the national system. Without that data getting fed into it, they probably would be handicapped a little bit. But again, they're independent in their functioning. So at the national level, as I mentioned, led by the constitutional mandate, CSO remains the focal point, but it does not have a mandate to intervene in matters of the other line ministries. CSO cannot jump into the Ministry of Statistics, or for that matter in the census office, saying that I will now decide what I want to do. They cannot. There is a concept called allocation of business rules. Under the allocation of business rules, which ministry or which line ministry will do which subject is defined. And that is maintained at the highest level by the cabinet secretary, which has the responsibility and accountability of creating these divisions of work between the different ministries. So therefore, it can only intervene only when there is a request from the ministry, and that request comes quite often. How does it come? Whenever there is any new data collection processes or any discussions on the new statistics or on SDG monitoring, the respective ministries will invite the Central Statistics Office the senior most officer or from the National Sample Survey Office to give them the guidance and necessary authority to move. Then there is a National Statistical Commission, which is an apex body. I will not go into that. So, which also, has a mandate over all India. Now, largely, the Central Statistics Office largely has three functions. It does collect certain statistics. They probably lead some of the large-scale surveys and economic census. But the population census and house census is with the Ministry of Home Affairs. It collates and compiles economic estimates like national accounts and the National Thematic Report, SDG reports and things like that. Ministry of Statistics or CSO responsible for that. And third is most important, providing technical support to the line ministries and to the states. Similarly, there is a link between the national office, statistics office and the state government. So there is a mechanism by which they interact. There is a platform where they meet every year. So what I'm trying to say, you need not go into all that. The knowledge that I'm trying to give you, that the systems are independent, but they're interconnected and they talk to each other quite often and then resolve certain issues. So what I just mentioned is just this is a very clumsy picture of the interlinkages between the national, the statistics office and the state offices. The point is that there is a connection from the state offices to the national statistics system, not only at the state level, even at the district level. And then there is also a two-way mechanism, data coming and flowing from the National Statistics Office to the state offices also. So that's what I was underlining, that there is a linkage all throughout in this entire system. So I was asked to kind of give you an understanding as that what is the role of the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation. In short, we call it MOSP. And during the MDG era, what we saw is that when these MDG reports were being compiled and were being disseminated, the role has been more of a collator. So they have been largely collator of information from the nationally available information or reports. Sometimes they will go to the states, but largely the collation used to happen of the various statistics that is required for reporting from the national reports. For example, those will be the National Family Health or the UDIs, all kinds of things. So they were largely a collator. Some information they will compile from the national sample surveys, survey reports and things like that. But it was largely, the monitoring was done at the collation level. But you must remember, at that time, the discussion on desegregation was not so much of a clamor. We never knew that, or the MDG goals never asked us to look at what is the situation of children, say by scheduled caste or scheduled tribe or urban. They said, okay, you bring down your mortality by such and such percentages, or by such and half, and things like that. But things changed in the SDG era. And when the things change in SDG era, and everybody started speaking, that come on, that goal is probably giving an aggregate view, but you are leaving many of them behind. You don't know what is the situation of, say, sanitation or drinking water or mortality, maternal mortality. You never have any idea what is happening. That's when the global thinking started, that it's time that we talk about taking everybody along, leaving no one behind. And so what happened? So they said, okay, so as I mentioned before, so therefore there was a lot of discussion on which are the goals to be kept in. And then you see this entire structure panning out, that you have goals, then within the goals you have a target, then you have all your indicators under each of these targets. Each was to be desegregated to a minimum level. So they went to that details and told the countries or the states to really follow that structure, bringing the priorities of the state also in view. But when we were in the path of really looking at SDG monitoring, there are several challenges that we find. That is, there are hardly any data for us to look at the village level or at the ward level. There's nothing that we can really work on. We don't know, as I've shown you in those slides, the partial distribution is not possible even at the village level in many cases. So what happens because of that? The resource allocations becomes inefficient. The resource allocation becomes inefficient, and there are many other areas where probably it's time for the government to really look at. So in terms of disability, do we know how many disabled children are there by ward or by village? Do we know how many migrant children are residing in my village or in that ward? What do I have to do for their identity or for their access to the social benefits that is mandated under the Constitution? We do not have any information. Do you have any kind of an understanding about what is the care-seeking behavior of these vulnerable population? Forget about birth rates, infant mortality rates, or death rates. We do not get these estimates even for all states. Today, all your estimates that you get at the vital statistics is only for 21 big states. For smaller northeastern states, there's hardly any estimate available. We always compute from Assam and say Assam's vital statistics rate is applicable in Arunachal Pradesh or in Meghalaya, which is a bit of a challenge. So there are several issues like enrollment, attendance, dropout at the village or at the ward level. If you remember the 74th Amendment Bill, which talks about Panchayati Raj and also the local level, administration at the urban level. How do you do administration and governance at that level if you do not have the evidence? It's time that we really look at these issues. I will not dwell in it. It's a subject in itself. It's a long discussion. And I was just trying to, again, we have done a small study to look at in Mumbai how the resource allocations have happened without mindful of the population in those wards. So this is your resource allocation. Do you see this? And if you see, so percentage of slum population is here. This is your slum population story, and these are your allocations in the primary education and also in the health services. Do you see any compatibility in these stories? Do you see any compatibility between what is the population of that ward and how much is the allocation? There's simply no consistency in the allocations. So you need to have, if you have that information, I know we had lots of challenges in collecting this information, but that shows that what is required to be collected as an evidence for us as a civil society. Okay, I'm coming to the end of my presentations, maybe 5 more minutes. So what we are telling, that it's important that the admin data systems that we have, which I showed as the management information systems, that is a huge investment which government has done. But to tell you frankly, and I'm sure all of you know it, that very few policymakers use the data from the MIS systems which they have created themselves. And one study that we did in UNICEF, it shows, and it was a study based on certain interviews that we had with some of the very senior people from the government. It says the admin data system that we have designed are very center-driven and not designed to meet the local data demands. From the MIS or from the health MIS system, can you give us an information on how many people require vaccination and how many children have been vaccinated? The maximum aggregate value that you get is at the PHC level, which is aggregation at the level of a PHC, right? Which actually is catering to 5 or 6 villages minimum. So you do not have any information at the village level to understand, because the way the system has been designed, it doesn't provide you the information at the village level. So how would Panchayat function? Today, if you look at the Plan Plus system, it has no information at the village level. It has how many roads have you constructed, it has how much of money have you planned and allocated for your sanitation. It doesn't give you anything to understand what is happening to the children, women and adolescents. So, and most importantly, these admin data systems are beyond the public scrutiny. It is not given to you or given to us to really look at and do a triangulation of what you said in the morning, that your data and how does it fit into the government data sets. So that is what, if the government can really open up their MIS systems for public scrutiny, that will do immense service to strengthening the data system. You can bridge the data, bring the trust into the system, and tell the government that, okay, you are estimating level of immunization at 102%, but it is just around 60%. You know, those kinds of things if you can do, and I really like the response of the gentleman there who said that you have to build the trust of the government to really come and say that this is the process that I want to follow, be with me, I will collect it as per the agreed schedule that we have agreed to, then it becomes reliable and the government starts believing on your data. I would move on, not touch this, there are lots of things. Okay. I will touch upon this. Today what is happening, you'll see every sector has got a database. And every sector has got, and I think somebody said in the morning that there are multiple values for one indicator. Multiple values. So whom do I believe on? What is the reliability of the information which the department is collecting, the ministry is collecting, the district is collecting? So there is a need of a kind of an integrated data system. So what is happening at the state level? Every state has a database. Every sector has got a kind of a. I'm really I get pissed off when I say the dashboard. So everybody has a dashboard. Okay. Instead, can you think of one state database? All information flows into the database, obviously through a gatekeeper. The system can be designed, and we are thinking of designing a system in this manner. And then everyone gets a view. Whoever wants a view. You need a sectoral view. The chief minister needs a separate view. All that can be collated from these, input points, comes to the database, and then everybody has a view of it. That will make your data much more trustworthy, and the people will start believing on what you're publishing. I'll move on, not touch this. Just wanted to show you what the states are doing it. So I have picked up Maharashtra. They are moving quite a bit in a very robust manner. There are few states who are doing very well. Maharashtra is one of the states is doing well. So they are in the government of Maharashtra, the planning department is the nodal agency for SDG, right? So the Director of Economics and Statistics is declared as whoever is the director is the nodal officer, and he is accountable for the vision document that the state has to come out with. And the line departments have been made responsible to formulate and implement and monitor the schemes which are linked to each of these goals. So it is still in the process of, come out with a state indicator framework for monitoring their SDGs, but the work is on. So what they are planning, they will be mapping the schemes and programs to the SDGs. They will identify the indicators for monitoring. Probably this is the time where the CSOs can pitch in their respective states to help the government to understand that what is that indicator that you really want to monitor, keeping in view which subpopulation you are missing out. Bring a big indicator on that subpopulation of marginalized people or the people who are left out in those indicator framework. And then they will also develop targets and then the action plans. I have seen some colleagues from Tamil Nadu. I don't know, I had a premonition there will be somebody from Tamil Nadu here. So I thought, let me also see what is happening in Tamil Nadu. Recently, the Central Statistics Office has conducted which is an annual feature, bringing all the state governments and have a discussion and a dialogue. That was a 2-day dialogue process. So that was the 27th Central Ministries and State Ministries Conference, which happened in Kolkata. I have picked up some of the slides from their presentations. So what we find that the Tamil Nadu has now created a committee, which is under the Chief Secretary pretty well, because you require a Chief Secretary and the authority of the Chief Secretary to really run through the departments when you have to come out of it. Then they have assigned, nodal departments with respect to each of the goals. Okay, all the departments have been included in the SDG. So they have established an SDG cell in all departments at the state level. Yeah.
This is very good on paper, and you can get this on the net.
Yes.
Yeah, but ground level is a totally different area.
Okay, I will come to the just give me 2 minutes, I'm finishing it. So you may be right. So therefore, what they have done is they have developed a set of indicators. Largely, they have picked up from the NIF, which is the National Indicator Framework. Very few from the state specific, for which the data available is 240. I want to make a note here, and the note is, in most of the states, what we are seeing, that the SDG framework has been a function of data availability. That means if the data is available, it should come into the SDG, not the other way around. In my view, it should have been other way around. I would have put those areas in my indicator framework, which is the need of the government, whether at the national or the state level, and try and generate statistics and numbers for that indicator, which is not happening. It is mostly happening that you have the data and then bring that indicator into that NIF. So, but I'm not commenting on these, but this is the generic observation which I'm making. So, leaving no one behind is the important area. I would stop here for questions. I have a few more slides, but I will not move into that. Yeah, you're open to questions.
Please?
Please.
Tamil Nadu is fantastic in putting things down on paper. It doesn't work. You should probably ask them how many times that high-powered committee actually met. It has been set up more than 3 years ago. Yeah? How many policy notes actually incorporate SDG reporting? So this, I think, is across the board in the country. Yeah? I think your point about them trying to fit the existing data into the framework, which is flawed in itself, that's again a big issue. The third point I want to make, and I think this is what is really, really important, is you're talking about disaggregated data. Now, it is not enough to have disaggregated data, scheduled caste and scheduled tribe, because each one of them is a different community. And each community is left behind in its own way. The way that a Mala or a Madiga is left behind, or actually pushed behind, the process of that is what the data should be able to help us capture. Now what the data is doing is, what we all know, their educational attainments are about 10 years less than the general population or the state average. The Dalit women in this country live about 14 years less. We know that. But what is the process that is pushing them out and keeping them out is what the SDG, that leave no one behind, that is what we should capture. Because the midday meal scheme is there for everyone in this country. Why is it that despite everybody having that same midday meal scheme, some communities have 75% malnutrition? Now, if you just have SC, ST, and all that kind of thing, you will not capture why that push out is there. And if that push out process is not identified, then this leave no one behind also will not work. See? So your point about needing a new way of thinking is very important. But the new way of thinking should also encompass what are the push-out factors. Now, which unfortunately we are still in denial. Now, it's very easy for me to come and say that, you know, the central government is in denial about this, that, the other. But as a society, India refuses to accept that we live on about 20 lakh families who clean our shit every day. Now, there is a study by WaterAid that shows that if a family does manual scavenging for more than 2 generations, that stigma will always stick. See? Now, unless we say that the manual scavengers, the Arundathiyar in Tamil Nadu, for instance, they are pushed out in a different way than the Musahars in Bihar, and then you need to get that push out of Arundathiyar, highlight that, then you include them. See? Now, that is what is missing in this. The second part, again you touched on this, but you didn't develop on it, is the local governance. The central government can make generic schemes. The state government can again make generic schemes. If you go back to your slide on the data management,
yeah,
you looked at the chief minister having that integrated stuff. The chief minister actually cannot do anything. We need the census to be credible, give us the broad national data. But we need a strong local government. Yeah?
Absolutely.
Which will get the schemes and actually manage it appropriate that level.
Okay. So
yeah? Now we are looking at so many different things. No, but again, in your presentation, you have hinted on this. You've gone maybe 30, 40%, but you've not gone through the whole thing. Yeah, that's my comment on it.
Thank you. Yeah, so I think these are the very interesting observations and very relevant observations. And to me, to take the entire gamut would have taken a lot of time. So it was a time limitations, but you have raised some of the relevant points on the data and how we collect the data. Yes, ma'am.
2 points. One, you said that the government needs to be more open to getting data from other sources. So is there some way that we can really explore that, how it can be done? That's one. The second, what you very, very clearly mentioned is we don't have data at the local level, whereas we have a local governance system. We have the GPDPs now to be designed by every panchayat. No? So is there some kind of a way in which places like GPDPs can actually capture people's data and be used by that? Because the government may be not very happy to have large-scale data which differs from its own data. But a panchayat doesn't really matter for the big data. So is there some way we can really include or bring some thinking in a different way to reach the most vulnerable communities?
Okay. I get your point. I get your point. I get your point. So let me respond to Annie and to you. And I've already responded to a gentleman here who was pretty right in his presentation. On my first slide, as I showed you, is the data is power. And that power is with us to change. When I say us, with the people. Okay, so so there is a system which is asking for change, and there is a system which is a bit old, but in my understanding, they're open because they are also part of this, the people. So there is a conflict which is going on between how much to open, and we must understand also there is a political dimension of the data. In no way I am justifying that some report don't get published or some gets published, some get a lot of time to get published. I am not commenting on that. But it is pretty clear that something which was not there in the last 10 years, now the importance of data has become very, very important, has become very critical. So that is why we see that some data don't get published, or even if it get published, it retraced back saying that, okay, this is not correct data and all kinds of things are happening. But how do we bring new data sets into at the village level, at the GPDP level, is something that we in UNICEF is trying. We have been interacting with the Ministry of Panchayati Raj as to how do you bring a change in the existing system, in the Plan Plus. I just touched upon the Plan Plus system. Today, Plan Plus system caters to a planning, whether there is a planning for the GPDP and how much money has been allocated, and there are several heads. It does not pick out any information on the output or the outcome of the money that you have allocated. So what we are advocating with the government at the Panchayat level, at the Ministry of Panchayati Raj, how these new output and outcome indicators can come into the Plan Plus. And this is the opportune time, mainly because the government has started giving a kind of a, child-friendly, GPDPs across the country. Now, we are arguing that if you really want to be objective in your assessment to be a best GPDP, whether it's child-friendly or adolescent-friendly or woman-friendly, you have to collect information, whether it is on sanitation, drinking water, child marriage, immunization, learning, dropouts. You have to collect that information at the GPDP level as also at the ULB level. So that advocacy, as you started in the morning saying, that we have to do a lot of advocacy. And we are doing it as a UN system, we are doing it, and I'm sure as a part of the civil society, all of you are doing that. So there will be certain points, and I do see that government is looking for a kind of new kind of data. That I can vouch for, that government is open for new kind of data. Because government also wants to see what is happening in the ground realities, because when they come back after 5 years, they have to go to the ground to really see that whether the piped water really reached the households or not. So somehow, some accountability is coming. So we have to keep on, advocating and communicating in the right way with evidences. That is most important.
So one more question, anyone? Yeah, please.
In the initial slides, you mentioned out of 301 indicators, or 191 indicators, data sources are identified. What's happening to the remaining indicators?
That's very interesting.
Okay. And second thing is, now the states have adopted their own indicators and have set up their own data collection system, etc. How is it really, getting integrated at the national level reporting? What is the process through which it happens? Or is national level reporting independent of what is happening at the state level?
Yes. So I'll start from your last assumptions. So today all the state indicators and the SDG indicators are very silo, right? So that's what I was showing, that if you have, say, a value for a particular indicator, say MMR, maternal mortality rate, okay, or on child mortality, or on drinking water. If there is one value of that indicator for the government of Tamil Nadu in the dashboard of the Ministry of Statistics, and there is another value of that same indicator in Tamil Nadu actually, there are two different values, there will be a lot of confusion. So what we are advocating with the ministry, so that they in turn can go to the states and talk about integration of the state databases. How would that happen with the national level? So at the national level, they have a dashboard. What we are advocating that you pull out, let the state pull out the data from the national database for some of these critical indicators so that there is a consistency in the values of that indicator, and the state related priority indicators can be collected here at the state level. But the main critical output and outcome indicators can be pulled from the national database because they are internationally accountable to give a report every year. So they will be filling that database and update that database. So the states can pull out those indicators and bring it in their own database. Their own priority indicators can be collected through the sectors at the state level because then they don't create much of a confusion. So a system has to be developed in that manner. So that is one. And you asked me one more thing, 191, what is happening? For the rest of the indicators, there is a lot of efforts going on. So they are interacting with the UN agencies, with other research organizations, that how do you bring new indicators and new data values. So that is a process because most of these indicators are at the tier 2 level. If I may explain to you, at the global level, there are 3 tiers of indicators. The tier 1 is for which you have a database, you have a methodology, you have a value. Tier 2 is there could be a methodology, but most of the countries are not collecting the data. So the indicators that we saw at 191, quite a few of them will be in the tier 2, and few of them would be such which the government has picked up as an indicator, but they have not been compiling it for years together. So they are now looking out a way out how to bridge that information gap. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that extremely excellent and interesting presentation, Mr. Mehti. So now I'm going to invite Srinanjan, am I right? Am I pronouncing your name correct? Srinanjan. So Srinanjan from Oxfam is going to take us through SDG 16 and 10, those 2 boxes in the middle. And he will also help us try to think about what indicators are missing. The issue that we talked about, we'll try to do an exercise on what indicators are missing from our angle. Okay? So over to you.
Hi, I'm Srinanjan Radhakrishnan. It's a very complicated name, but feel free to call me Tri, as the rest of people call me. I work with Oxfam India, and my work is at the moment looking at SDGs and how companies are to be held responsible for their commitments to the SDGs. So it looks at corporate accountability, business, and SDGs. No, I'm fine. Fine. Yeah. Why is this not coming out? And but a lot of my work on SDG also was prior to joining Oxfam, and I was working with Commonwealth Human Rights Initiative, which basically works on access to justice, police reforms, accountability, transparency, human rights issues. So SDG 16 was pretty much the mainstay of my work at CHRI. And okay, anyway, while this is being sort of sorted out, the idea with SDGs and data, I think most of you have understood, and you are very well aware of most parts of SDG data, sort of infrastructure, landscape, as Mr. Mehti was also talking about, where data is collected, who collects it, what are the different linkages between state and national data. But I'll begin from there, and I'll get into some of the specifics for SDG 10 and 16. Yeah, okay, great. What happened? Just double click on this. Perfect. Great. So I'm calling this presentation mapping the datascape. It's a rehashed title that I had from earlier, but essentially it's looking at what is the data landscape that exists for SDG 10 and 16 at a global level and especially at a national level. This is all of this data talk is essentially part of, what is being called as data revolution, and data is so important that it's also been mentioned as one of the targets in SDGs 17. Goal 17 is a means of implementation, and one of the means of implementing the SDGs is through data, to use data for accountability, and through transparency. This report is a 2014 report, a World That Counts, is a UN report which basically sort of really put forth the idea of how data is going to be. Okay. All right. Great. Thanks. Is it? Yeah. Speak. Okay. And one of the interesting sort of trivia is that the 90% of the data that we have at the moment with us seems to be generated in the past 2 years. This is primarily, with the increase in technology that is available, the different ways of collecting data. I think Annie was also talking about it in one of the previous sessions, that no longer are people keen on collecting data with pens and papers. I mean, you are using geospatial data, you're using audio data, you're using video data, photographic data. So all kinds of data is being covered, and with increasingly sort of the whole fad thing called Internet of Things, there is tremendous amounts of data which is also generated. But I think it's also important to know that the data that I'm going to be talking about, the data that I'm going to be talking about is not big data. Big data is fundamentally different from non-big data. I'm not saying this is small data. Big data is something that mostly technological firms generate. Metadata is also what is called. This is more not to do with that kind of data. I think it's also important to just sort of get a quick sense of how data works. I mean, why are we talking so much about data? We're fussing about data. We don't have this data, we don't have that data. And I think there is merit to that, because one is that, as that sort of creepy slide kind of tells you, that data visibilizes the invisible. Data kind of shines the light as it is upon those folks there. So you understand what was previously opaque, that you did not know, now you know. The other thing is data can also go into the particulars. I think one of the best example of that is GDP. GDP is a massive aggregate data. It doesn't tell you about anything. It just tells you about how much we all in this room generate as product. It does not tell you about the discrepancies between people. So again, the data helps you to sort of particularize things and not just look at this one big, big head, but the little people that make up the whole. Another sort of interesting way that I often think about data is, I don't know if you have ever indulged yourself in these little dot line drawings, where you have a lot of dots, each dot is numbered, and you're supposed to connect one dot with the other dot, in a sequential manner, and what you get is a picture. So it's essentially that, you first don't know what exactly you have until you connect all the dots, and then you get an amateur Mona Lisa. Essentially, the point being that in this case, all the different little dots that you see on a piece of paper are your data points. And when you connect all of that, it tells a story. And for me, the most exciting part about SDG data is the story it tells. It's not so much about the metadata. It's not so much about whether the data is available, smart data that often people talk about. I am most intrigued and fascinated by indicators. Indicators are what tells you. I mean, data can only reveal when the right kind of questions are being asked. And I think in the earlier session, when Annie was talking about data, this is a slight point of convergence is that I think there is tremendous amounts of data, even on Goal 16, Goal 10. There is so much data. Let me give an example. We actually know data on the square footage area of police stations in India. We have that data. That data is available. But we also know number of police personnel. We also know amount of legal aid given by the legal aid authority. But the question then is that with all of that available data sets, some of it is available online, some of it you actually have to go open up books. But the question is that what is it that you want to know? And that's where I think the whole question of indicators become extremely important, because you can have data sets for all the things in the world, but unless you're asking the right question, which is framed in an indicator, you're not going to get the answer that you're looking for. This is the often repeated big numbers of SDGs: 17 goals, 169 targets, and 244 indicators. And this was done at a global level, and this is the targets are broad targets. The goals are very broad, the targets are slightly less broad, and then the indicators get into the nitty-gritty of things. There are and the entire sort of indicator framework was developed by what the UN calls Interagency Expert Group on SDG Indicators. It's very typical of UN to have a very mouthy acronym. But anyway, this is what it is, and this is the global kind of a coming together of national statistical organization officials, CSOs, academics to come together, and they made this entire indicator framework. This is the global indicator framework that I'm talking about. So there are 244 indicators in total. Some indicators are repeated, so you see some indicators are common for Goal 10 and Goal 16. So 232 is actually the unique number of indicators, and that's quite a lot. And I think the best place to look at this kind of data and what all goes into the back end of data is through the UN Stats IAEG SDG page. If you are a data nerd, this is a great playground. It has all kinds of things. It tells you about what is metadata, what kind of tiers. I think Mr. Mehti also mentioned tiers. Classification tier 1, tier 2, and then there's tier 3 also, where tier 3 is indicators for which there is no methodology and there is no data, but it's kind of aspirational. So I mean, all of that stuff is housed at that UN Stats page. But from there, if you look at more specifically on SDG 10 and 16, this is what we get. There are 10 indicators for SDG 10 and 10 targets and 11 indicators, and that number really drastically jumps to 12 targets and 23 indicators. I also need to tell you that I think reduced inequalities is the goal, and it's I think this is the only place, this and Goal 16 is where the question of discrimination really pops up. and that's the kind of way that UN at a global level looks at discrimination in the sense of reduced inequalities. But if you look at the list of global SDG 10 indicators, you'll see that some of them are reduced inequalities within countries, and some of them are amongst countries. So the whole north-south, more developed, less developed, this balance is also kind of attempted to be addressed through SDG 10. So some of the kind of data indicators that SDG 10 deals with is, for example, household expenditure, discrimination, although, yeah, well, you have SDG 10.3, I think, which talks about discrimination. You have labor share, you have migration, you have overseas development assistance, ODA, and remittances, again, which relates to migration. And then you have SDG 16, which is kind of almost feels like a catch-all, because all the other difficult issues that SDG 10 could not sort of take over have been pushed to SDG 16. It's peace, justice, and strong institutions, but actually it's everything that is political. Violence, child abuse, rule of law, justice, transparency, accountability, participation, inclusion, human rights, fundamental freedoms, national human rights institutions.
Just wanted to tell everyone that indicators for 10 and 16 are on your table. There are 2 copies on your table. So as he's talking, if you want to dip into those.
Yeah, I'll come to the national indicator framework. Thanks. So I'm still at the global level. So these are global indicators. And as we know that, the whole point of, the reason why 193 or 92 countries finally, after 3 years of intense negotiation, were able to come to signing, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development as unanimously, is also because inherent in the SDG declaration is the idea that all these countries commit to these goals, but the indicators can be set, keeping in mind local contexts. And that's why in this whole exercise, once you have a global indicator at the global level, each country then develops its national indicators. And I think that's what we were talking about in the previous session about national indicators. So MOSPI is the main nodal agency for making national indicators, and I think I'm glad that you all have a copy of the national indicator framework, because it's quite big and I couldn't have managed to fit it into a slide. But essentially, if you look at goal 10 and goal 16, can I get a glass of water, please? There are 7 indicators and 4 targets, and yeah, sure.
Because they're not able to record, there's a lot of disturbance.
So there are 7 indicators for 4 targets and 18 indicators for 9 targets. And I think it's really helpful if you actually look at the national indicator framework, and when you compare it to the global indicator framework, you see what is missed out. What kind of indicators the government of India, or rather the MOSPI, has devised and developed for the targets. It also gives you a sense of what has been the thought for the government in sort of devising these indicators. For goal 10, there's a large number of indicators that were missing. For goal 16, I think around 3 indicators, 3 targets for which MOSPI did not make any indicators. So, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think some of you probably know this. These indicators came out in 2017, the latter half of 2017. And then a year since then, so almost a year from now, back in December 2018, Niti Aayog came out with this report, and this also follows. There's also an online dashboard that Niti Aayog has. And this is, what it calls India SDG India Index baseline report for 2018. And I mean, it came out in 2018, but the baseline, the data that for baseline is for 2015, which is great because when we are looking at, how, the countries, especially India, has progressed on, achieving the SDGs or just progress towards the goals, you definitely need a baseline. I mean, what are you going to compare, current figures to? So this baseline report is great, helpful, not great, helpful. And the baseline is for 2015, the year that SDGs began. So in a way, I mean, 2020 is going to be a kind of, an exciting year for SDGs because, you would have finished the first 5 years. 2020 also marks the decade for action, the need to accelerate action for achieving the SDGs. And most interestingly, Government of India will present its voluntary national review, which is essentially a national SDG progress report, in July. So it's a good opportunity to see, what have we done in the past 5 years. And I think, and that's the idea of the government as well, but what is disturbing is that in the government's SDG index, these are the indicators that the Government of India is tracking. So in a way, we had, the big global indicators. There were 169 indicators, 169 targets and 244 indicators. From there, we have national indicator, the national indicator framework, which is done by MOSPI, which has around 306 indicators. Still not enough for specifically goal 10 and goal 16. As I said, that I think there are only 7 indicators for goal 10 and a few more for goal 16. But now what we have is a skeletal structure. So essentially, these are the only 3 targets on the left column. You can see the targets that Niti Aayog's SDG indicator, SDG index will be looking at. Bottom 40%, empower and promote, different social groups and policies, especially fiscal for social protection policies. And you can see what kind of indicators it's using. It really baffles me to think that when you're looking at a target such as empower and promote social, economic, political inclusion of all, irrespective of age, sex, disability, race, ethnicity, origin, religion, or economic or other status, that one indicator, ratio of transgender labor force participation rate to male labor force participation rate would suffice. It's shocking. Equally shocking is when you look at goal 16 indicators in Niti Aayog's, just a second, Niti Aayog's index. And that's why I think, when you look at, for example, goal 16.3, promote rule of law and equal access to justice for all, one indicator seems to capture it all, which is number of courts per 10 lakh persons. And that's why I think I started talking about, more than the availability, the authenticity, the veracity, the timeliness, the disaggregation of the data, and the frustration that comes, especially for civil society organizations which are looking for transparency, looking for accountability. But more than all of that, the challenges of data, I find the indicators to be most telling about how data is going to be seen, how the government looks at data, how the government prioritizes, these numbers for essentially achieving the SDGs. Deepak, you had a question? Comment.
I was looking at the data sets for the Niti Aayog, the baseline report, and the MOSPI report which came this year. It's a bit contradictory.
Yeah, I mean...
No, for example, what you're saying about like goal 10, goal 10.2, there is 3 more indicators here.
in the national indicator framework. Yes.
Yes, and none of it talks about the transgender which is talked about there.
Absolutely, yeah.
Similarly, for the 10.4, where there is 2 indicators already there, that doesn't reflect in this document. And it's only, this is talking about SCST and this is talking about Northeast, budget for Northeast states. And yeah, so this is not just one case which I went.
It's across. It's across.
It goes across. So it also creates kind of a disturbance in understanding what kind of data we are going to look at, because this, and obviously this might be a contentious point of contention for the government also, where to look at what are we actually focusing on.
Yeah,
so I think you can just
Yes. In fact, it's not like that. In fact, what you have said, the baseline report is not by the Niti Aayog, it is by the Ministry of Statistical and Program Implementation. That was under the preparation. These indicators were taken at that time in the SDG index, which they wanted to prepare for the year 2018. And the data was available at limited indicators. And it was very clearly mentioned in the SDG report itself that all the variables which have been taken are not from the NIF. Only there were 28 variables which were from NIF out of 62. But the SDG2 index, which is now under preparation, almost finalized, that will have many more SDG NIF indicators. So those issues which you are mentioning, they are all will be addressed. Because NIF was an independent exercise, SDGs index was independent exercise by the Niti Aayog. Okay.
Thanks. But I think, I think Deepak's point is also that. Yeah, but I think, Deepak's point is not so much in terms of, that of course, Niti Aayog is also going to improve its reporting. I hope it does. But it's about the kind of incoherence between different government agencies, different government departments. MOSPI is running in one direction, Niti Aayog is chasing in another direction, and in the middle of it, you just don't know what is the data set. I mean, you can also use an example, not between Niti and MOSPI, but if you look at some of the Goal 16 indicators and the data, you will find discrepancy on the same indicator or the same value indicator between NCRB, which is a National Crime Records Bureau, and the BPRD, which is the Bureau for Police Research and Development. So, and there is enough of that kind of discrepancy, and we can figure that out later. But if I can just continue with this, this is, but my essential point being that indicators is what tells what you are going to collect. If you have an indicator for understanding, what is the square footage of police stations, if you think that's a really important question, then you have to make an indicator that answers to that question. So the point is that this is how the right column gives you an indication of how the government looks at addressing the left column. And that's pretty transparent and telling. Sorry, 5 minutes. So yeah, I mean, and this is what it is. The other thing that I was, and I picked up during Mr. Maiti's session was that so far the whole indicator development process in India has been kind of in reverse. A case where the tail wags the dog and not the other way around. The government has made indicators for only those areas for where it already has the data. So if you don't have data on a crucial aspect that governs discrimination or it governs access to justice, then you will not get a data, because developing data sets, methodologies require a lot of money. And to me, it seems that the government would want, has been so far, maybe it'll change, the government so far has committed, as in the least amount of resources to make the national indicator framework. If you have the data, then you get an indicator. If you don't have the data, you don't get an indicator. It's not a question worth asking. And that is extremely wrong, because the whole idea is that data is going to, I mean, that's not transformative. For something to be transformative, you have to change things, you have to add new things, you have to allocate resources. And so the indicator development process has been, to my understanding, disappointing. But I am not super disappointed with what the civil society has been doing. I think there's a lot of new kinds of data that is coming out. Some of it, you probably have discussed earlier, and some of it, most certainly, you will discuss and engage with in the coming sessions. Yeah, that's about it. Thanks.
We can take a few questions, comments, suggestions, whatever, but just very short ones, please.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. There was a comment regarding metadata. Can you comment a bit more on it?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I think there is, in popular imagination and through social media, it's just become quite pop to talk a lot about big data, metadata. I mean, these are, terms that are no longer alien or unfamiliar to most people. Metadata is something that, as the name suggests, it's mega data. It's, above the individuals. It's largely looking at trends. For example, data of the data, exactly. So it's metadata, right? Yeah, it's metadata. And what it does not tell you is about, the lived experiences so much. It will tell you about, for example, your technological portals.
What is metadata? Metadata is the data. For example, you say birth rate, say it's 43. So the metadata will describe how the birth rate is calculated. What is the numerator or the denominator? There's the metadata, and it's defined because everybody understands that the same way.
Yeah.
There's the metadata.
Yeah, no, of course. And in fact, when I was showing you the UN stats page, which talks about the IAEG's, metadata, it basically tells you that metadata is about, how the data is calculated, what are the different variables, what are the units. So, for example, when you are making your own indicators, you're making supplementary indicators, you are doing a shadow report, that kind of stuff is really helpful. But often what happens is that for the less initiated, including me just a couple of years back, you hear about big data, you hear about metadata, you hear about data, and increasingly companies talk a lot about big data. You know how big data is going to be the panacea, it's going to solve all your problems. And I think that's something that needs to be differentiated, that when we're talking about the kind of data that I'm talking about on SDGs is not big data. Metadata is kind of like, in the back end of it, understanding, what makes this indicator. And I think the best way to understand, for example, at a global level, what the metadata is to go on the IAEG website, and on a sidebar, they have metadata, and you can really scroll through, the different goals, the different targets, and what their metadata is. For example, what is the periodicity of that data, what will be the units of that data, how are you going to calculate it? So you are right, very much right. And that's metadata.
Okay. Thanks very much. Let's give him a big round of applause. I also want him to conduct the next session, but before that I want Annie to come and distribute us into groups, because what we want to do is do the next exercise, analyzing SDG 10 and 16 indicators on a thematic level. So Annie, please explain.
See, अभी you know 10 goal 10 and goal 16 के ऊपर हम में से बहुत सारे लोग काम कर रहे हैं. Many of us actually work on issues of inequalities and issues of access to justice. And I think somewhere there is a lot of knowledge with us in these two dimensions. But as Srinanjan was saying, there are not adequate indicators in the framework currently. So what we were thinking is, can we develop some of these indicators? Because we work on access to justice, we work with most vulnerable communities, we work on issues. So can we take a little time? We wanted to take a little time where we can work on these indicators and then be able to suggest to the government also that some of these can be the indicators for goal 10 and goal 16. So Trinanjan and Devendra Bhagdi and also what I was thinking is, if we look at goal 10, we have 7 targets.
Okay.
And we have about 3 means of implementation. No, that's about 10 things under. अगर आपकी टेबल पर NIF है, नेशनल इंडिकेटर फ्रेमवर्क है, तो अगर 10 को देखेंगे तो उसमें 7 there are 7 indicators, 7 targets and 3 means of implementation. No? And if you look at goal 16, there are 10 targets, 2 means. So my suggestion was, can we divide these targets onto tables and say, from your experience of working with marginalized communities, can you identify 1 or 2 indicators? Say, suppose I divide from target 1 to 3 on one table and target 6 to 7 to another table. Because I realize that all of us work in some way or the other on inequalities and access to justice. So maybe some ideas will come to us that under this target, we can have an indicator like this. But maybe we need to just explain a little bit on how to develop an indicator.
Okay.
No, a little, or we just.
So, okay, so
yeah, you go ahead.
developing an indicator is a separate workshop. Okay, so we are not doing it now. What we need to do is, are you okay with looking at select targets and then thinking of indicators which are missing, which you think are not representing your target group? Are you comfortable with that?
You can give it a try.
Okay, let's give it a try.
It's a try, and I think we can improve upon it as we move, because the level of knowledge and community engagement that people here have may not be actually available at another place. So
we don't touch the existing indicator. Over and above that, what
no, we look at the target and see for that target, is there an indicator that we can suggest? And because there are people who are working on Dalit rights issues, gender equality, and mostly a lot of access to justice and inequality issues. Yes. Yeah, I'll do that.
Okay, I want all of you to come to page 26 of the National Indicator Framework on your table. You'll have to share because there are 2 copies on each table. Page 26. Are you there? Okay. So 10.1, 10.1 to 10.4, this table. Okay. Okay. 10.5 to 10C, this table. Is it okay? Remember, there are no national indicators yet in a number of things. So this exercise is really relevant for us. Yeah? Okay, then we have 11.1.
No, 16.
Oh, sorry, I'm sorry. Page 39. Yeah? (16.1) to 16.5, this table. Okay. 16.6 to 16.9, this table, okay, and 1610 to 16C, I think, yeah, this table. What is your task? I'm just facilitating this and then you can. Your task is to look at the targets, okay? Are you with me? Is everybody with me? Look up from your document for a minute and listen to me. Just listen to me for 2 minutes. Look at your target, example 1610. Yeah, it's group work. It's a workshop. Okay? So 1610 says ensure public access to information and protect fundamental freedoms in accordance with national legislation and international agreements. Okay? It has one indicator which says percentage of RTI queries responded. Your task is to look at the indicators for that target. First, talk about whether this is sufficient. Is it sufficient? Is it capturing the various dimensions of that target? If not sufficient, what is missing? Yeah, and suggest an indicator. I'm not saying formulate because that's a separate exercise, but at least suggest. These areas are missing right now. We need to look at this for 16.10. Is it clear to everyone? Your time starts now. You have time until 1:45. Okay? 1:45, we'll ask each group to make quick presentations. Okay? 1:45. It's 12:10 now. You have till 12:45. Okay? Okay. So let's listen to group 1. Let's give them a big round of applause. That's okay. Don't worry about the format, but what are the areas which you have identified which are missing, which should be covered? Yeah?
Okay. Thank you very much. I would like to present in for the group 1, who looked at goal 10.1, 10.2, 10.3, and 10.4. Due to lack of time, we had only discussions on some of the indicators, but we did cover all. So some of the, on 10.1, we thought that one of the things which is missing is that the income-based data is of disaggregated communities are lacking, but it's also because we also thought, in a discussion, we also thought it will be difficult to track the income-based data. More expenditure is more easier to track. So we thought it is one thing which is there, which is not there. But also we would like to see the data on the borrowing because expenditure is not just the income, but it's also, there is a lot of borrowing happens for various reasons, because mostly of reasons of poverty trap and all those. So that's one. The second is that we also wanted to see more disaggregated data on household expenditure or income in that manner, especially disaggregated on the basis of age, sex, disability, caste, gender, ethnicity, and origin, religion, and all. So, which is already given in this 10.2, but we would like to also see it in 10.1. Then on 10.2, we also wanted to see a disaggregated data on all these things, but also see also wanted to quantify the vulnerable populations who 10.2.3 talks about vulnerable populations, vulnerable groups who are elected or in the elected bodies. We need to see we need to unpack that. We need to see it from various vulnerable groups, not just which in the Niti Aayog report it is said about SC/ST, but we need to see more vulnerable groups and into this. So is there anything? Okay, 10.3.1, which doesn't have indicator. We tried to see what could be the indicator. So we thought that we need to, the indicator could see on identifying the discriminatory laws and repealing it. It talks about various discriminatory laws, and we have identified that there are various commissions which have been put under put by the government of India to look at the various forms of discrimination, and we can take some of the recommendations of those commissions, and we could look at putting some indicators on this. You want to take, Pablo?
Yeah, for example, there's a MP based Bharwar report that looks into the northeast populations in various cities in the country, and there were a series of recommendations that has come in. It was set up by the Home Ministry. So those kind of things, and many other commissions and committees are also mentioned. And we didn't actually include the social exclusion part. I mean, when we talk inclusion, we look at income and political inclusion, but not in the social exclusion part. So the Bharwar report would be a very good example of how it can be.
We also have the Justice Achar Commission report, for instance, the Uniform Oil Administrative reforms on women HASPA. So all those are there. That's how we do them.
So on the basis of that, we also talked about creating some affirmative actions, which is mostly there for SC and STs, but also for the other communities. And the 10.4, which is absurdly only talking about Northeast states allocation to budget, which we thought that it might be, it might lead to more inequalities rather than reducing inequality. So even in Northeast state, who are we looking at? We need to specify that. So also it talks about the wage, physical and social protection. So it will be easier to look at the number of workers registered under the welfare boards, and which also should be disaggregated by gender and others. We also think that it needs to also cater into the standard minimum wage across the states on the basis of the national standards. And also we need to see that how in the Niti Aayog baseline report, it also talks about various social categories like SCP, SCSTs, and SCST, where SCP and TSB has been, how the percentage of SCP and TSB has been utilized. It also need to come under this. I think maybe it can be you can actually bring both of those together. There are some indicators which are very good in the other one also, so it will be good. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. We got from 10.5 to 10.C, and for none of these, the national indicators have been evolved yet, I mean, except for 10.C, and it's all in a domain that we were not very comfortable with, but still we have tried to look at some of them. We started discussing first 10.5, it is improving the regulation and monitoring of global financial markets and institutions, and strengthening the implementation of such regulations. So we first tried to understand what it could mean, and I think we kind of concluded it's about consumer protection and also protecting the local markets, local producers. So we thought of that there should be an indicator related to consumer protection, and I don't think this is anywhere there in the SDGs, any of the SDGs at least. That's what we think. I mean, we didn't really go into it. So this needs to be captured, measured somehow, because at the end of the day, it's the consumers who are the ones impacted the most. We also thought that we should there should be something that measures, that says, how do you protect and promote local producers' markets within the whole global financial market system? So this was our limited understanding of this target. So then we moved on to the 10.7, the second one, next one, ensure enhanced representation and voice for, that's 10.6, sorry, developing countries in decision making in global, international, economic, financial institutions. Again, very, very high level and complicated. But we did think that, for instance, there are these mechanisms like the Financial Action Task Force and WTO and SEBI also, right? And we were saying, for instance, we need to look at, no, in the previous, sorry, we were also talking about institutional standards and accountability that needs to be brought in, both in the previous one and this one. And we were saying, for instance, in this Financial Action Task Force, which looks at financial, the way money laundering, financial transfers and so on happen, civil society representation voice in that is missing. So that somehow needs to be maybe brought in as an indicator. This is all wishful thinking, I'm sure, but that's the other one in the decision making and yeah, voice in it. Okay, so then we looked at 10.7, which is facilitate orderly, safe, regular and responsible migration and mobility of people, including through the implementation of planned and well-managed migration policies. So first of all, we said there is no national policy on migration. I mean, there is immigration-related policies and departments, but national policy on migration, even the definition of who a migrant is. So there is all kinds of, there is formal, legal, short-term, long-term, forced, all kinds of migration, which also borders on trafficking and forced labor, all of that is there. So a clear definition of migration, therefore policies related to that. And the second one was number of states. So as an indicator, we said number of course, one is a national policy. The second one, number of states that have formulated policies on interstate migration. So here we said, first of all, there are no policies because people who migrate, and we were talking more about from, you know, the very informal sector kind of labor migration that happens where people are exploited or they are not able to access their rights when they move to another cities, area, whatever. So we were looking at it more from that. So then we said there has to be some kind of state policy which then either puts in place tracking mechanism, registration of workers who are moving, or if they're all totally informal and gray, then maybe bring them on formalize them somehow, collectivize them. So institutional mechanisms to track, so databases maybe. So I don't know how these can be, how these should be. We didn't look at the formulation of these indicators. We were just looking at issues and challenges and what is currently missing. Maybe one way was to say proportion of migrated people accessing basic services. So for that, of course, you need to have a database first to be able to measure this. So all that discussion, so that's it, yeah. It's a bit, yeah.
Hopefully I won't stand too long between you and lunch. So we didn't actually go very far. We had a very big chunk to cover in 6.1. And 6.1 was significantly reduce all forms of violence and related death rates everywhere. So the indicator that was there, and one of the things that I think was very healthy conversation that we had was that much of the indicators are like outcome indicators. They're based off of assumption that data is there. So a lot of the indicators seem to be whatever data is available based off of that. But what we were discussing a lot about was how can we have process indicators? And one of the things that we came up in the discussion was, for example, domestic workers and how do we prevent violence on domestic workers. But there's no legislation that encompasses what, you know, domestic workers are and this unorganized sector of labor. And so one of the things is, which we were rightly advised was more of a policy push rather than an indicator, is to have a legislation that would define domestic work. And then another point that we started conversation was on the Dalits and how violence against Dalits are, how can we have an indicator to measure that? And so number of deaths due to intercaste marriages was proposed, could be an indicator. And then another area that we were encouraged in our conversation to explore is perception data. So perception data on like the sense of security that people have in their communities or even walking on the streets. So that could also be a part of an indicator. And in fact, another sort of perception data that came up was how do we measure aggression and violence in children in schools, because they are going to be the future. And so how do we reduce that violence and aggression in children at an early age to prevent this in the first place? And then the other two things was increased resources and representation for marginalized communities in statutory and vigilance bodies. So how do we have more women in the police forces? How do we have more Dalits represented in the vigilance bodies? And then we discussed also time-bound tracking and training of vigilance and monitoring mechanisms. So one thing we discussed was, for example, the chief secretary sitting, once a year for monitoring where they are with the SDGs, but when rather they should be sitting maybe once every 3 months. And so can we look at that kind of process indicator to help improve these aspects? And that was as far as we got.
Sorry. Hi, I'm Abhinav. So we were given 16.6 till 16.9. We also didn't get pretty far. So we had a lot of passionate discussions about each of our works. So I'll just look at so we just looked at the indicators that have come up in the national indicators, and it was primarily focused, what we felt was lacking was it was primarily focused on the online available data, as it was talked about earlier. So what we missed out, we felt was lacking here was it was looked at from RTI perspective, but it was looked at from RTI queries and application, not looked at, they were not focused on the resolution of RTI queries. So basically the second appeal and third appeals, so maybe like that could be added to it. And what we could add as an indicator over here could be number of government institutions. There is a clause under the RTI Act which talks about proactive disclosure of information in government institutions. So we were hoping if an indicator could come up with number of government institutions implementing the proactive disclosure of information, which every institution being from government schools and primary healthcare facilities and all, like the UDI's data has to be put across schools and primary healthcare facilities, and all of these institutions could have the disclosure of information. And then 16.7 was as far as responsiveness and inclusiveness goes, we felt so confused right now. It was focused on a bit on the women, so nothing against women, it's just that we were hoping if the addition of LGBTQIs and the DNTs and the NTs could be added. So each of these indicators that are given, if they could add the DNTs and the NTs, and LGBTQIs as well. LGBTQI, there would be an issue regarding whether voluntarily somebody would be interested in disclosing the information, but something can be looked at. But so, and the thing is, the proportion of seats held by women in national parliament, state legislation, and local self-government, certain states have at panchayat level they have reservations, but not at parliamentary level and the legislative level. So if there could be provision of, that would be an advocacy thing. Proportion of, and I believe, I think she covered it earlier, the proportion of SCs, STs, LGBTs, and DNTs in institutional offices, central information commissions, the proportion of basically these elected members and nominated members by the government in these institutions, and that it could be more inclusive if certain information commissions could have the addition of SCs, STs, and LGBTQIs or people from those communities, marginalized communities representing these institutions. So I think so 16.8 was not really addressed. So it was too broad. So by 16.9 we went into, I think it covered, people were okay with that. Percentage of refugees, we came up with an indicator which felt percentage of refugees, most of the conversation was around refugees. And it was percentage of refugees provided, to be provided legal identity. So if the government could work on that. So yeah, thank you.
Hello everyone, this is Pragya from UNICEF. Our team was given 16.10, 16A and 16B, and we could discuss 16.10 and 16.A. So 16.10 target is to ensure public access to information and protect fundamental freedoms in accordance with national legislation and international agreements. The national indicator says percentage of RTI queries responded. Our team felt that when we talk about response, it could simply mean even if there is a denial towards giving proper query to proper response to that query, saying that okay, this is the information, that's also counted as response. So we felt this is mostly an output level indicator, and we thought of looking at it from the outcome perspective, and that's why we together came out with an indicator which says percentage of cases disposed against the appeal in the higher or the apex appellate authority in an year, which means that if I put up an RTI query and if I don't get a proper response to it as desired, I may or may not, I may like to appeal to the higher authority and seek a proper response. So the measurement would be against the number of cases which went for appeal and number of cases which were which received proper query within an year span at the national level. The 16.A says the strengthen relevant national institutions, including through international cooperation for building capacities at all levels, in particular in developing countries to prevent violence and combat terrorism and crime. The national indicator is not yet evolved. We went through a process of, as a team, we identified some of the institutions which fall under these categories who prevent violence and terrorism and crime, which included National Human Rights Commission, state level human rights commissions, NIA, TADA, and things like that, institutions, so on and so forth. So the first level of indicator that we came up was number of cases appealed against, number of cases disbursed against number of cases appealed to these institutions in an year span of 1 year. Like human right, for example, if the Human Rights Commission needs to be like to be made really effective, we need to understand how many cases were actually appealed in to the commission, and how many of them were disposed or disbursed in a proper manner, and number of field investigations which the authorities made to reach to those to get to the required number of to provide the required response. This indicator basically meant, as a team, we thought it's a kind of prerequisite for all the institutions to do a reality check on grounds, to look into the what actually went right or wrong in a particular situations. So that's kind of prerequisite, but is that prerequisite being addressed or adhered to or not? So the MOV, that means of verification, could perhaps be their field reports against which the findings or the insights for the particular cases are being given, and hence the number of field visits or the field investigations need to be measured. So yeah, I think we're done. Thank you.
I think all of you have sort of, really touched on some key issues that are missing from the indicator framework or the existing list of indicators. I just think one is that, if you're pushing for a policy, then the question you ask is, does the country have a policy? An indicator is almost like a question that you're asking. And when you're making an indicator, you also have to think what could be the probable answer. Government often answers in yes and no. So if you get a yes, the country has, or no, the country doesn't, you don't get anything more than simply a yes and no. So, the question needs to perhaps be not about, whether there's a law or not, but look at some other points which, can reveal something more than that. And the other general observation is that I think one should not be restricted in designing indicators based on what is possible today. I think, consumption data is easier, some other data is not, but that comes later. You first have something, only then will one be pushed to find ways to achieve that. And I think, the more imaginative, innovative, extravagant that we can be in asking these questions, what are the kind of indicators we want, the statistical part of the indicators then can catch up. But if you only think of what is possible with the resources that I have today at my disposal at this cost, we'll basically not be able to shift the status quo. Thanks.